Hello there. Welcome to Blitz Transmissions. I'm Tommy, and I'm here for a very special addition to our interview series, a very special conversation we're going to be having here about Star Wars action figures, Star Wars Black Series, a little bit of a side of the hobby and the side of the process of Star Wars action figures that we as the consumers don't get to hear about a lot. I'm joined today by a very special guest, Mr. Bailey Wheatland. How are we doing, Bailey?
Doing pretty well. Just like I said before, like keeping busy with everything. The start of the new year is definitely like in full effect. I'm working on a bunch of different things, professional and personal. So yeah, just kind of, taking it day by day at this point, but having fun nonetheless. So I'm glad to be here. So thank you for having me on.
Awesome, man. I'm glad that you could take the time to be here with us today. I know that people are going to be really excited to, hear about this aspect of the action figure process. Obviously, it's exciting for us because I know we're both big Star Wars fans, and we're going to be talking mostly about the Black Series line today. And I know that you have some experience there. But before we give everybody your deep dive, I'll let you fully introduce yourself and give everyone your background and everything like that.
Sure.
Real quick, everybody, of course, if you're not yet subscribed, subscribe to Blitz Transmissions. I've got awesome Star Wars content coming out all the time. If you're an ARC Trooper in my Patreon, you would have seen this interview early. If you'd like access to early content, monthly giveaways, and other awesome benefits, you can check out the link to my Patreon, which is in the description below. For just $4.99 a month, you can become an ARC Trooper. If you're a fan of the reviews I do on YouTube, or you want to support the YouTube channel more directly, you could also check out my YouTube channel membership, Rancor Battalion. That's just 99 cents a month. You get exclusive badges, priority replies in my comment section. You get access to all my reviews early here on YouTube, and of course, you also get to vote on what I review next for the channel, just like the Patreon members do. If you'd like some Blitz Transmissions swag, like this Blitz Transmissions trucker hat I have on backwards, you can't even see the logo, and some other awesome stuff, you can check out the link to the Blitz Transmissions Armory over on Printify, as well as links to my Discord and all my social media. I've done all my blabbing. So Bailey, of course, people may not be familiar with you. I, of course, because I'm way too invested in the Star Wars action figure world, I, of course, am familiar with you and your work. But for those who may not be familiar, if you just want to give everybody a rundown, take as long as you'd like, of your background and why we're having this conversation today.
Sure. Awesome. Well, with that being said, now I'll take the reins and just, again, introduce myself and say, hey, I'm Bailey. My background is actually in video game design. That's what I went to college for. And I kind of came across like the toy industry by mistake. And it was because toys were always like a really fun thing for me in general. But then like once like I got my first console, which is like the PS1, I kind of went from toys to video games, and that's been like my main passion. So I went through most of my schooling and everything geared towards being a character artist for the game industry, which again, there are certain like things that do overlap between toy production and games, and the fact that, since I was geared more towards characters, anatomy is a big thing, color theory is a big thing, like kind of engineering or prepping things for movement is another common trait too. But really, it was like a professor who's like, "Hey, I'm really good like friends with like these people at Hasbro, and like I think you'd be a good fit for this stuff." So I'm like, "Okay." And this is back 2018, 2019 that I first got in contact with Hasbro, and again, I actually kind of avoided anything that had to do with mechanical engineering because that's one of the reasons why I wanted to go into video games, because when you work digitally, everything is like you can get away with a lot more than what you can in the physical realm. So whenever you'd say like mechanical engineering and more like mechanical rigging, modeling, stuff like that too, that had to actually be plausible with its like design work and its mechanical function, I'd be like, I'm out. I'm not your person. That's not me. I just super intimidating by it. But having said that, back in 2019 when I first started as a temp at Hasbro. So just a little bit of background on like that too. So Hasbro, for the most part, they do internships, but they also do temporary contracts. For a temporary contract, you're there for about a year, and this is like pre-COVID. So I actually did have to move to Rhode Island to be in office and working like there,
Oh wow,
from Monday to Friday, which is really cool for me. So I graduated in 2018 and then went to Rhode Island in 2019 and pretty much like got my own toy production schooling all throughout that year, because like I said, I knew nothing when I came in. So the first ever project that I worked on was a boot cut for I think Squirrel Girl from Marvel.
Oh wow,
and
okay.
It was like and again, like all of these terms I'd never heard before. So when my supervisor at the time, Dan, he had said, can you like clean up like the flat plane of like this like boot sole for the Squirrel Girl? I'm just like, what, flat plane? What? Like, do you have the right person for the job? Did you see like my portfolio? What's this? So my only like prior experience to like that was I had 3D printed out a massive like T-Rex head that I sculpted way back in like senior year of high school, I think. And I
Okay.
like that 3D printed, hollowed it out to save on cost and everything like that. But that was the only extent that I had to operating in like a realm of where, oh, this digital thing will be printed and it will be made physical. But when it comes to toy production, entirely different thing. There's so many more complexities involved with it. So, but I'll kind of go more towards like the general like kind of where I am to like this day point in time. So I went throughout all like that first 2019 like year, just kind of getting like my bearings as a toy sculptor, and just trying to figure out like, okay, what is shiplapping, what is shrinkage, what is like even different ball joints exist too, and like just discs and flat planes and butterflies. So I'm just like, I was never really into like the collector space for toys. Like I said, when I first got that PS1, I really went from toys right into games. And really never looked back. I did still keep a lot of my toys from my childhood, but they kind of just went in a bin and went to like the back of the closet type of thing. So, but I do still hold actually a lot of inspirations from like those toys in my own artwork. So, for example, one of like the toys that I really loved when I was small, they were called Extreme Dinosaurs, and
Okay.
they're just like really kind of not really complex when it comes to articulation, but from the design portion of everything, they looked awesome. They're like these kind of like big, kind of like hulked out bipedal like dinosaurs, just
Yeah.
really very 90s actually. And I just remember like loving like those so much as a kid. So now all like the work that I do when it comes to monsters and dinosaurs, it's very much inspired by that, even though if I'm conscious of it or not. So all that stuff does have a bearing on me even to this day with my own personal design aesthetic. So going back to Hasbro. So like I said, I went through all of 2019, just trying to get like my bearings, and then after like your contract ends, you're pretty much on the outside, just doing freelance vendor stuff for them. So throughout 2020, and obviously this is like the height of the pandemic when it first hit, I was just a freelancer really. So I was just doing like, I moved back to Illinois, and then I was just working remote and just doing stuff for Hasbro. And then towards the end of that year, Hasbro wanted to bring me back on full time because
Okay.
I had like a lot of skill sets they wanted to use in like their day to day. So calling upon like my video game like digital background as well as like my newly acquired toy engineering background, they wanted to bring me in full time for another contract. And then halfway through 2021, they had terminated like that contract, so then they could promote me to a full time position at that point for an actual toy sculptor manager. And at that point is when I actually started to focus more on Star Wars Black Series, and where I was kind of under I was like shadowing the sculptor on Black Series, whose name is Tom. You might have seen him on like the Pixelogic.
Yes,
like,
I'm familiar with him. Yeah.
series. So I worked hand in hand with Tom since 2021, and
Wow.
it was a great experience. He taught me a ton about how to like manage like time, how to be a good sculpt manager, how to give people enough kind of flexibility to like add their own mark on things, but also not to be so off like out in like the field where like they're not hitting like the target that you set for them. So I learned a ton from him, and I can't thank him enough for all of his patience with me, and also just that nurturing of sorts. So but yeah, I was pretty much just working with him on Star Wars Black Series. I worked on a bunch of other things too, which smaller projects, smaller lines too. Like I managed 2 waves of Bounty Collection.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, so the last 2 waves of Bounty Collection, I managed those. And then that's kind of a funny story too, because back in 2019, when we were first working on Bounty Collection, I was one of like the people who made like the base body for Grogu.
That's
So it's
cool.
kind of like a full circle moment where like this thing that I had helped cultivate in the beginning, I got to kind of see at its very end too, with managing the last 2 waves.
That's cool.
So it's a really fun thing for me. So I worked on that, and then I worked on like maybe 2 waves of Epic Hero. I was brought on like, later to like that, so I had to like meet a different sculpt style that they had preset with manufacturers at that point. So really, just kind of me bouncing all around like the spot, and also in combination with that, I was working on a bunch of like digital innovation stuff that was like outside of Star Wars, but it was also really relevant to the company. I taught temps and interns, coaching like them on everything that I had like learned up to like that point. So really, I didn't only work on Star Wars. I wore like 5 different hats every single day.
Wow.
So it was really, really challenging, but also really fulfilling at the same time, because even though at the end of every single day, I was just kind of gassed at that point, I learned so much. And when I look back on my experience at Hasbro, it's nothing but fulfillment. So, but all that to say that most of my stuff was Star Wars Black Series, working with Tom finessing points of articulation, overhauling like portraits and stuff like that too. So just trying to make sure that we were hitting our quality that we had set forth. And I know that, just my rapport with Tom, we had a really good, back and forth of like, him giving me enough flexibility as well to add my own mark on certain things that maybe he didn't see, or maybe that he wanted to get my input on. So it was a really great collaboration between like both the two of us, but also just like the wider Star Wars team. Like they were all great to work with too. Like the designers and engineers too were awesome. So it's been great. So
That's awesome, man. So you were with Hasbro until I believe this last summer, correct?
yes, like that's my layoff was in June of like this
Okay.
past year. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and so you've had the opportunity to work on all different kinds of stuff, and that's one thing I will say is with a fast-paced work environment like that, you really show yourself just how much you're really capable of. I've been in multiple jobs with fast-paced work environments, and it's definitely teaches you, separates the boys from the men, so to speak,
Yep.
because you're doing so many different things, but you're also learning so many different skills, whether it's, leadership roles like, teaching interns to, learning different skills and also adding more things to your own tool belt, both in, interpersonal skills and in stuff you can actually use in your job. So that's cool to hear. When we were talking before, obviously we focused a lot more on the Black Series conversation, but when I hear you talked about things like Bounty Collection and the Epic Heroes line, like that's cool. That's cool to know that there is a lot of overlap in that kind of stuff.
Definitely. And also to add to one more thing, I just recalled like this last point, but it was during like around like the time of my layoff. So I was actually the sculpt manager, the sole sculpt manager for Tron, like that, both like
Oh
the 3 3
wow.
quarter and 6 inch. So that was like one thing that, so after shadowing Tom for close to 4 years at that point in time, they wanted to, test me out in that way. So I got to, oversee all the sculpt for like 6 inch, but then for 3 3/4, I got laid off probably like when we are close to finishing sculpts in that way. But yeah, a ton of learning with that too, because when I didn't have time to lean on, it's just okay, let's call on everything that you learned over those 4 years. Like, let's put you to the test. So,
Yeah,
but
man.
I was, even though like I didn't get to go through the entire production, like, because we got everything, approved at that point. But when it comes to, manufacturing all the other stuff too, like you do have to kind of keep on like the up and up with like that. So I obviously can't be a part of like that process because I was like laid off. So at least when it comes to like the sculpts as they existed, I was pretty happy with like where we were able to land with like the deadlines that we had. So, but yeah, that's my kind of like my ultimate challenge as a employee at Hasbro. And it's kind of interesting that after like the pinnacle of like that, then like being like laid off, it feels like the conclusion feels kind of like at the time it felt like oh man, I was reaching my full peak, but at the same point I'm like okay, that I reached like the highest high, and then you cut me. So I'm like, yeah, there's like a kind of like a silver lining in that way too.
It's a
So
little bittersweet. Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of funny. I know you mentioned earlier, before we get into the specifics of this process of digital sculpting and all that stuff, because of course now I'm thinking of additional questions. But one thing that I wanted to ask you was, what attracted you to the toy world, and to hear you talking about how no, it wasn't like something that you were actively seeking out. It was actually something that you were pointed in the direction of. So video games were always your thing. So I was a big gamer myself all throughout middle school, high school.
Yep.
Obviously, as an adult, you have a lot less time to be participating in
Yep.
video games and stuff. But what was a lot of your favorite kinds of games to play? Because that's kind of helps me to understand, what your mentality is going into, sculpt design and things like that, based kind of what your inspirations and influences were from
Okay.
games.
Great question. I love that. Yeah. So for me, like when I look at my, I guess, video gaming experience, I kind of define every single console generation as like a different moment in time for me. So when I was introduced to video games, it was like the PS1, Sega
Mm,
Saturn era of gaming, and that to me is just like it's kind of like the whole like Aladdin, like oh, it's a whole new world type of thing. Where this thing that I only at that point in time only played with toys in my grandma's backyard, and that was about
mm,
it. But then like when video games came up on the scene, and my family like they actually got into like video gaming for a good bit of time too, where we would always play Crash Team Racing.
okay.
And I've been a Sony boy, a PlayStation boy, like for my entirety of just playing video games. So CTR is like one of the things where that's kind of one of like the best and most like I guess impressionable like moments in like my history as a creator because I saw how much fun and how much joy that brought to me, but also my family members when we would do like CTR tournaments and stuff like that too. I play a lot of Spyro. That was like another game that I loved. All their Crash Bandicoot games, I love that. Jack and Daxter going into the PS2 era, that was my thing. I was way more into the kind of action adventure, and then if we go into the PS3 era, Uncharted. So really, I was really locked into whatever Naughty Dog was doing, like in that point in time. So in Gears of War as well, when I got my 360, that was another thing that
Gears of War, man.
I've only played like the original trilogy. I didn't play anything after like that. But again, that was another kind of impressionable trilogy that I'm just like, oh, this is awesome. And I had a lot of awesome memories with my buddies with that one too. I was also like into Call of Duty, like Modern Warfare, and then 2, and then World at War were the two ones that I played most with my friends. So every single Friday we'd like go over to like my buddy Joe's house, get a bunch of pizzas, have like the rest of the guys over and just kind of play until like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. And then sometimes it'd go even up until 5. So.
Oh, yeah. I know all about it, man. Yeah, I remember back in the day, honestly, Gears of War 3, because I was an Xbox kid, so I know we're opposites. We're looking over different sides of the fence here. But Gears of War 3 was one of the first games I ever remember like committing to beating like the main story of, and that was a game I had on the 360. I was a huge Call of Duty kid all throughout high school. Shout out to my buddies. We had a competitive team in high school that we played Call of Duty Black Ops 3 on. So that was
nice.
But yeah, games like that, games like the Gears of War franchise, and you said like the Call of Duty franchise, I can see how that aesthetic from that era can influence something as realistic as action figure design and how things work, how things move, just from those game models. As rudimentary as they were compared to now, right. I mean, a lot of those games, especially those cutscenes, still hold up for the most part in today's standards. Yeah,
like more like stylized games do stand the test of time because they weren't trying to get like that realistic thing that's just going to age out the next year, right? So I mean, like that's why I've been replaying Jak and Daxter, even like the first game. I'm just like, this pretty much holds up because it's so like the art direction is so strong and it's so stylized where just like you don't really have the hardware limitations as apparent as it was like if you're playing, let's say, Call of Duty 2 or whatever. So it's like I think that it was really smart working in like that time to not go to the nth degree with like photorealism as we knew it at that time, which as looking back on it now, you like see it like we thought that looked good at one point, but that's just how things go, where like every single like console generation gets better and better with like the graphical fidelity and stuff like that too. So but yeah, I mean, my video game stuff is just like it kind of went across all different genres too. Like I was also into fighting games like Mortal Kombat as well.
Yes.
It's more like off the wall stuff too, like demos that I would get from like video game like magazines and stuff like that too. I pop like those in, play like those. So I was really just kind of locked into everything. And then I discovered other things like Sonic with like Sonic Heroes, and I did have the Xbox One, the Xbox period, and then the Xbox 360. Those are the two ones I had. Then after like the 360 era, I kind of just solely focused on Sony at that point. So I did pick up, and it's really like the exclusive that drove that console purchase for me. So I'm like,
that's it for a lot of people, yeah.
So things like Gears of War, I'm like, okay, I gotta play like this because I've been hearing awesome things about it, so I gotta get the 360. Also, I heard that the 360 was more powerful than the PS3. So I'm like, okay, to play like the highest fidelity games, I need to get the 360 as well. So I got a bunch of different games geared towards that too. So that's but no, I mean, like I said, my background, my main like love and passion always came from video games. Toys kind of introduced me to like that world of, like entertainment stuff, but then like video games just like locked me in like there. And even to like this day, like you were saying, we don't have a lot of time to do stuff, so I'll hop on to Gran Turismo 7, do a quick race, and then be back on my merry way and doing like work and stuff. But coming to like do something, I guess. So yeah.
Yeah, most of the time, the only game that I've really committed to playing the single player for was Jedi Survivor in the past like 3 years. So I mean, yeah, like you said, usually it's like I have 20 minutes to kill, I'll just jump on Survivor and beat up some enemies and then just like jump off. But honestly, video games are some of, I think for our generation, some of the most fondest memories that we have, both with friends. I remember playing Call of Duty Zombies till 5 a.m. and then having to go to church in the morning and you're like a zombie in the building. But
exactly,
so with Star Wars specifically, were you ever that big of a Star Wars fan, or is this in the same way that the toy industry kind of got pointed in that direction for you? Was it the same with the Black Series and with all the other lines in that brand?
Yeah, so it was actually more so the latter,
Okay.
actually. So, like, I was always a casual Star Wars fan. Like, my first
Mhm.
Star Wars experience was going to the movie theater, which with my mom's like boyfriend at the time, like his like son and like their cousins and stuff like that too. We went to go see Attack of the Clones, and
Nice.
that was my first like experience in like the theaters, like seeing Star Wars. And at that point, like I said, like my mom's like boyfriend, he was like a massive Star Wars like person. He's like, you gotta go see it. It's like the best thing ever. And then I went to go see it, and I liked like two parts of like, the movie, but it didn't really pull me in. Like I liked obviously when Obi-Wan faces like Django,
Yeah.
that's really cool. And then the Battle of Geonosis is awesome too. Like
You don't like sand?
well,
You don't like sand? What's wrong? What's wrong
well,
with that whole sequence?
yeah, it is what it is. Artistic liberties and like that was George's like vision. So I mean,
Yeah.
that's his thing. But in terms of like keeping my attention as a child, I'm just like, there's a lot of like kind of dealing with politics and stuff that too. That I'm just like
I was right there with you.
over
Yeah.
my head. So I'm just like, as soon as I saw like the laser swords, like lightsabers, I'm just like, oh, that's awesome. But just it's kind of cool to know that something like that big even existed, because even like my movie going experience beforehand, it didn't feel as big as Star Wars. And like I said, even though I was a really really casual Star Wars fan, that entire brand just pulls a certain like gravity behind it. And even though like I had no clue what Star Wars was, the lead up of picking up like this other person to go hop in the car, and then picking up this other person to hop in the car to then go to the movie theater, it was an awesome like lead up to an event that I had no clue about. So, well, as far as like what to expect of the movie, but it was no, like that was like kind of like my first entry into Star Wars. And funnily enough too, most of like the Star Wars movies that I see first time in theaters, I'm kind of indifferent towards, but then I end up loving them on rewatches.
Okay.
So the one bit of Star Wars content when I was really young that really drew me into the brand and made me a fan of Star Wars, though, and why I appreciate your intro, is the Gendy series.
Yes, dude. Yes,
Because I was
dude.
big into like Samurai Jack, like that was my thing. Like
Same. Same.
I was also into like Dexter's Laboratory, and then apart from like Gendy style, I was also into DC, like whatever Cartoon Network was doing with like Batman
Hmm.
Beyond. Like that was my thing. I love Batman Beyond so much. So I mean, it had like that rule of cool factor to it with the Gendy series that I didn't really get from the movies, because obviously with animation it can be a lot more expressive.
Yes.
So that whole thing of like just seeing like General Grievous for the first time in the Gendy style, that was actually what made Grievous my favorite villain of all time in Star Wars, was the Gendy series, because they made him more like a xenomorph from like Alien and stuff, where
He was so overpowered.
he,
Yeah.
he was
Yeah.
so cool though. Like he
Yes.
just
Yes.
his massive scale too. Like on
Yeah.
that first battle, he like just dwarfs everybody else. I'm just like, that's awesome. Then he's like flinging people by his like feet and stuff too. I'm just like,
Yes. Yes.
that's pretty sweet. So I love like the Gendy series, and that actually got me hyped for episode 3 as well, leading into it. So I mean, and yeah, so I mean, when it comes to my fandom as a Star Wars fan, it was more so in the video games, like Republic Commando. Love that game. I also
Hmm.
love the movie tie-ins. Like I think like there was a F3, a kind of like battle game too. I'm forgetting like the name of it. It might have just been called Episode 3.
I think
But
it was just called episode 3. Yeah.
yeah, so that was like really cool too. Lego Star Wars was a really big fan
Dude.
of it. So
Yes. You're
yeah,
speaking my language right now.
yeah,
Yes.
so really, like again, for me, it's just like video gaming is what draws me to a lot of like, these brands, because like the level of immersion that you have like there, the fact that you can actually play in that world was a big thing for me. And also, I played All Survivor as well. Loved that so much.
Yes.
So, I
That
mean,
was a
it's
great
really
game.
just, for me, it's more so like the medium that I'm like experiencing the art in that really
Mhm.
makes that difference for me. But with the one exception being the Gendy thing, like I'd actually wait on Cartoon Network and like watch shows I didn't really care about to try and see if this new Gendy series would like air in between like those bigger like episodes of
Right.
different shows. So they really had an awesome strategy of keeping kids locked in to watch shows just for little snippets of like this series here and there. But yeah, for me too, like the Samurai Jack and like the overall Gendy aesthetic too has contributed a ton to my personal like design aesthetic too. So yeah, for me, it was like Gendy. I'm just like, okay, if I wasn't a Star Wars fan before, I'm definitely one now. So
Yeah, man. It's so funny when I talk to people around my age, and we talk about when you have similar childhood experiences. It's the same thought process. Like, yeah, I'd be sitting there. I was way into Cartoon Network as a kid,
yeah,
and I would watch. I knew all the shows. I knew what time of day, a
yeah,
day of the week each show came on. And just like you, I didn't understand the concept of on this day of the week a new episode would air. So I'd wait at the same time of day and go, is it going to
yeah,
be a rerun or is it going to be something new? And with Gendy specifically, because I love Samurai Jack, I love '03 Clone Wars.
mm-hmm.
What's great about his art style is that if you pay attention very closely, that's one of those art styles where you could watch it 1,000 times and you could notice a little minute detail that's different every
Yep.
single time, whether it's the way that a character moves or a little quirky thing that a character does while they're fighting, like
Yep.
Grievous holding lightsabers with his feet or doing a backflip and throwing a Jedi into the ceiling with his foot. There's so many little details. The way he transforms on Coruscant
Yep.
when Roran Karab is using his four throats on him,
Yep.
and he's just
Yeah.
curled up into a ball. Man, it's
Yeah. I'm just like, that is so cool.
yeah, it's little things like that. That show will always have a very, very special place in my heart. As much as I'm a super ultra mega fan of the '08 Clone Wars show,
Yep.
the '03 Clone Wars show in my headcanon exists simultaneously. All the events line up the same for me. So
Yep.
on that note, before we end up spending the next 2.5 hours talking about '03 Clone Wars, because Gears of War and all that stuff,
Yep.
I kind of want to get in, pick your brain a little bit about this aspect of the Star Wars action figure process, just the action figure process in general. So obviously, as consumers, on Blitz Transmissions, I've had the opportunity to talk to, people who were big into the marketing and the brainstorming process, like the great Daryl DePriest,
Yep.
of the, Star Wars Hasbro team from about 2005 to 2015. I've had the opportunity to talk to designers and, people that are in more of the idea generating side of things. But a big part of the process that a lot of people don't really take into account is the actual making of the figures. And, I've had the opportunity in speaking with Daryl to learn about, the steel molds and how much those cost. And that's why reuse is such an important thing in an action figure line, et cetera, et cetera. So with action figure sculpting, because that's what your primary task was designing the actual pieces that would be
Right.
made into the action figure. I guess the first jumping off point I want to get into here is, where do you start with these kinds of things? Do you usually start with like the head or the torso? I guess there's also a difference too. Are you working on a part of a figure or the entire figure? How generally, depending on experience or what have you, what is your preferred method when you're putting together an action figure?
Gotcha. So this kind of does change on a project to project basis. Like for
Okay.
example, if I'm working on something with a really complex mechanism, like let's say electronics or whatever, and like that, I'll kind of build everything around that to make sure that I'm like hitting certain like manufacturability around like that mechanism.
Hmm.
But if it's for something like let's say like a Star Wars Black Series, a lot of times like I'll just kind of start with a base model that I can get kind of like lock in like the design aesthetics with and make sure that everything's looking good from like the anatomy standpoint.
Okay.
And then at least for like a general block out at that point, I'll start to like kind of hack it apart and like start to add articulation points, because if you get too far into like the process where you create a really beautiful sculpt, you didn't really give a whole lot of consideration to like range of motion for like this elbow joint or like this neck joint or whatever. So you're gonna have to kind of redo a lot of like the work they use to kind of polish everything up. So I find that for the most time efficiency, just getting like the raw like block, I make sure that everything has a good like weight to it, and at that point start to like hack things apart at a very very early stage. Kind of also allows me to make those more, I guess, extreme design compromises to get the max range of motion, to make sure that we're hitting at least 110 degrees or 105 degrees like at the elbow joint.
Hmm.
Because if I didn't do like that, all of a sudden like I'm having to resculpt like a forearm muscles or whatever. So for me, like my process is like if it's for like a collector based line like Star Wars Black Series, which is really just kind of parts that move, no electronics, no mechanism or whatever, or no feature in that way, then kind of just doing like the base sculpt, really quick blocking, hack it apart, set my articulation points, and then kind of polish it as I go through like that process. That's kind of what I do for like that. And then for more things that are like feature dependent, I'll build everything around the mechanism and try and get it to look as good as I realistically can, because sometimes there are aesthetic compromises they do have to make with really clunky and like bigger mechanisms too. So that's really like the balancing act, where it's always like that form and function type of thing that you need to have like that proper like harmony with too. And that's really what makes like the job so fulfilling, but also very challenging too. So
Okay. So for you, what works best is design first and then putting in the articulation after you've made a figure that looks like the actual character, for
yeah,
something without electronics or some sort of gimmick, like a light up feature or things like that. Okay.
Exactly. And like to kind of go a little bit more to specifics too. So I would not say like, let's say, I wouldn't put like all like this like secondary, tertiary form detail in a bicep if I haven't cut the articulation point, because I might have to like move that bicep like slightly up and slightly back
okay.
to get like more range of motion. I might need to kind of offset like that pivot point so I can get like more range like that way too. So there's a lot of like different ways and kind of tricks to increase the range of motion. But whenever you make an adjustment like that, everything else has to follow. It is a domino effect. So if you don't, set that first and foremost as like your kind of, schematic in that way, you're going to have to redo a lot of like the work they used to kind of polish up and make like the sculpt, beautiful in that way. So like that's just, again, for me, from a time efficiency standpoint, it's like I need to get into like the block out phase. And then at that point, I'm not as, I guess, because the time investment hasn't been like there yet to where I feel very kind of, almost like nervous to make certain like decisions or choices. So the fact that I'm so early on in my sculpt process, it gives me enough kind of, I guess, callous to be a little bit more like, okay, I need to hack it here, hack it there to get like range of motion this way. And at that point, I'll make it pretty after the fact. But if I were to like, let's say, make something pretty before, now I've got more time investment in towards that polish.
Right.
So I'd be less likely to make that bigger, we call it like radical surgery sometimes, that radical surgery, because at that point I got to spend X amount more hours on like this stuff. And now, am I not hitting my deadline type of thing too? So just from like that kind of, go mentality, that's kind of, what works best for me as a sculptor in that way too. So,
okay. So I'm just learning, the process as you're talking about it here. So the term I'm taking it is design compromise when you're adding in an exposed point of articulation to the sculpt. Okay. So how much freedom do you have as the designer in deciding how much articulation something gets? Is there a limit that you are given based upon, I know budget obviously is part of it. How do you know going into designing a figure, okay, well, I can do this and I cannot do this because of, it has to be, let's say, this number of pieces at the max or this number of, points of articulation at the minimum. If you want to get the most out of the range, are there like footnotes that you're given when you're handed a project, or do you get complete creative liberty over deciding how you make each point of articulation work?
Right. So I wish this had a clear-cut answer, because it doesn't, because it does change on a per project basis. And also too, even for that single project, stuff can change all the time as well. Like for example, if let's say I put, butterflies in a figure, and at some point in the process, they're like, oh, we got to like, do this, that, and the other to compromise on like our costing for this other figure or whatever.
Okay.
You might have to like, go back on like that butterfly or what have you. There might be other ways to optimize, part count if need be. But at least with the kickoff, and I'm speaking as an outside vendor now. So when, I get approached by a manager at the kickoff, they'll have a rough idea of like, the parts that we're looking at. But even like then, stuff can change all the time too. So I'll just sculpt everything like how we discussed it. And then at that point in time, depending on how far in the process it's been talked about, the manager themselves might make that edit because they don't want to have to kick that back out to a vendor, or they just might not have time to do like that. So they might just kick it out to, somebody else at that point. But it's really just kind of, you have to be a little bit more adaptable in that way too. So we do kind of lead with like the thought of like, the common practices of, butterfly joints, single like elbow. It's speaking for Star Wars Black Series, that is, because I know that Marvel does a whole host of different things too.
Oh yeah.
So we kind of do try and standardize everything to that degree. But other like compromises are made. Like for example, you guys have probably seen like that Turgle was like one figure that didn't have elbow and like in knee. At least off memory, I don't think he had like movable like knees or
no elbows, no knees. I have him on it. I can grab him. Here, give me some.
Oh yeah, I love seeing that figure. Turgle's got a special place in my heart.
Did you make him?
So I worked on like the elbow and like the knees. I sculpted like the wrinkles around like those areas. Yeah.
This guy, this goofy guy right here. Yeah. This is probably one of my like most memorable reactions to an action figure, because I do the live reactions on my YouTube channel when there's ever a Hasbro Star Wars fan stream. I remember freaking out when I saw Turgle pop up with that scuba stev and cowl pack. Yeah. So yeah, in case like that, where like he was like a part of like a 3-pack in that way. Like so, certain compromises do have to be made to kind of cut down on piece count. But I did sculpt like the wrinkles around like those like parts of like the elbow and the knee. So like I said, some of my stuff like it was really just touch up work here and there for like the larger sculpts. But I mean, when Turgle got into the line, I couldn't believe it, because I know that I think myself and like a few other people on the team, we really wanted to get him in line, and then we just found the perfect opportunity at this point.
And the fact that he did see like the light of day, it just makes me so happy as a fan. Because I mean, there's sometimes too that stuff can like be sculpted out and then put on like the back burner or whatever, or just doesn't come to fruition. So
Right.
I'm glad that Turgle survived. So
Yeah. So Turgle so are you saying that he initially did have the plan was ideally he would have elbow and knee joints, but then because of budget it had to become more condensed? Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah, so like
okay, interesting.
those were like always like the plans. Like I said, for the most part, we always kind of lead with like this idea, like okay, standardized type of things. But then like stuff happens all the time too, where okay, it's just like how like what would we like optimize here type of thing, and we just have to kind of take that in stride because it's like sometimes it's also a thing where like okay, if we don't do this here, then the figure might not get into the line. So those are kind of harder conversations that you need to have a lot of the times too. But like as an outside vendor, it's one of the things where I kind of just like go with like that mode of thought, like okay, I'm going to make like standard Black Series or Marvel Legends articulation. Just go with that mode of thought unless I'm really told otherwise. Where like hey, we need to like do this, that, and the other to meet costs, and then at that point I'll be like okay, cool. But then even like then too, I try and look for ways to sculpt things in a way that optimizes on deco too. So things like how you break out a part two can also have manufacturing just do one deco hit on this part versus having them to do two. So that does matter as well. So having all those considerations as you're sculpting it definitely helps the entire process and also the entire pipeline too. So that's kind of that's what I would say about like that primarily. So
that sounds like such a complex and I'm like developing more like questions as we go here, which is like honestly, this is my favorite kind of conversation. It sounds very, very complex. It sounds like a constant balancing act. And like you said, from project to project, it's not like a blanket rule per se.
Right.
It's constantly this fluid moving process where it's like, we're going to have to cut this. Oh, well, we can actually, we can make this work. So in general, would it be fair to say that you start with a rough draft of your idealized version of the figure with all the articulation that you would want to give it, all the bells and whistles, and then when budget comes in, that's where you kind of get your realistic version of what you can end up with? Do you end up submitting that first draft to like the head whoever it is that tells you, okay, we're going to have to make some cuts here, add some things here, or so is that all digital, that first draft then?
Yeah, pretty much everything that I was like, helping out with was solely like digital at every point in the process with that. Because then at that point, once it's like licensed or approved, it'll go off to manufacturing, and manufacturing has a whole host of different things that they'll like do to edit like the model of their two. Wow. And at that point, they'll kind of kick everything off to be prototyped in that way to make sure that all like the range of motion is checking out when we do test out the range of motion in the figures in that way too. But when it comes to the budgets and everything, like I said, we have like I don't want to say like an assumed budget, but based off like years prior, we have like an idea of what we can do. And then obviously, like I said, stuff happens all the time. Like the economy, like fluxes this way and that way. Stuff in the toy industry also like changes too. And then stuff, like I said, you just have to be adaptable. So always going with that best foot forward, but also knowing like where to pick and choose your battles too also does help. Because you're working with not only like the Star Wars team, but like the broader like Hasbro's teams as well too. So just trying to know what things like what hills you want to die on type of thing. So but all that to say that I think that we do a pretty good job with bringing stuff to market at the quantity that we do with like our character selections and stuff like that too. And then like I said before, making those compromises where they make sense. We just try and be and we're also constantly improving too. Like we're never like fully satisfied with being at like this quality or that quality. We're always looking for ways to kind of push the envelope even further, and that's why I'm really glad, especially in the last couple of years, that the community has been so vocal with what they're wanting to see out of certain things too, because that kind of helps people like me who are working on the sculpt to be like, okay, I've heard like this, so let me give like this consideration to like this part of the sculpt process too. So because like I said, I came from a background of video gaming, so when it comes to my collector brain, I had to develop like that while I was working on all this product. So it's stuff that design stuff I did like let's say 3 years ago, I would not do how I do today. So
gotcha.
It's always like the constant thing of like trying to be the best I can be and show up for the people. Well, show up for myself too as a sculptor, but then show up for fans who love like these like characters, because I worked on a bunch of characters that no clue about them. Like I actually worked on Shizor, no clue who that character was. I worked on like the portrait, and I worked on like the little kind of like wrap around his like little staff of sorts, but no clue who that is. But I'm going to show up because I love sculpting. I love portraits, and I'm going to show up for myself. But then also for like the fan who grew up with that, like Tom, who's a massive Shizuo fan, I'm going to show up for somebody like him. So there's like that kind of dual responsibility, like where you want to do best by yourself, but also you want to do best by the fans, is like to that point too. So all that to say that it's always a ongoing challenge because, like I said, your design and engineer brain grows with each and every single project. So just knowing how to navigate all those different parameters, I guess, is like what makes the challenging or the job challenging, but also fun too. And the one, like, I guess, way that I can kind of tie this back into video games is whenever you're making content for video games, it also needs to be optimized to hit like the polygon count, texture resolution for like those target platforms. So coming from a video game background, I already had the idea in my mind's eye of like, okay, it needs to look good, but also needs to run well, or it needs to be optimized to hit those, that checklist of sorts. So toys is kind of like a similar vein in that way too, where it has to look good, but also has to meet cost, and also has to be functional, and also has to meet because when you check all three like those boxes, really you've got a really compelling figure, whether that's internal or external for consumer or internally at Hasbro. So
so it sounds like there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, a lot of hands in the pot when it comes to every step of the process.
Definitely.
And so it is interesting though to hear things like that. Was surprising for me, especially. Like, I could see it though, like when you talk about Turgle, like initially the rough draft of the figure, he would have had elbows and he would have had knees and all that, and then notes come back and things change, and then that has to the figure, you guys have to adapt the design based on that. So I have a question about, and obviously we'll get into a little bit later here, some of your specific figures that you did work on, along the lines of the articulation stuff, because this is kind of, you're the exact person that I'd want to speak to about this, would be when it comes to the across the whole breadth of the Black Series line specifically. And you would have been designing at the height of this, honestly, right when it started as well, because not to spoil what we're going to get into, but we are eventually going to talk about, you did work on Darth Malgus for the Black Series, one of the considered the all-time best figures in that line. That was one of the first figures that did away with that cut for the thigh swivel for the Black Series, and that's been a very hotly debated topic ever since then, with people that do the easy side of it. I always say it's very easy for us, like people like me, to sit here and kick back in my chair and critique and yell and scream and stomp my feet about things that maybe I like or don't like. When that's why on this channel I try really hard to help audiences and people who watch my channel understand how the process works, so that you can have an informed and educated opinion on everything. So I've heard both from the actual Hasbro team. I've heard one that it was a design choice, and one that it was, so the priority being the design, two, the priority being cutting down the piece count. So you being somebody who was working on the figures, and again, Malgus being, I remember, one of the first figures, if not the first Black Series figure to make that big transition over to the no thigh swivel with the modified hip joint. What was, if you could say, what was the note on that? Was that, hey, we're moving into that direction where it looks aesthetically more pleasing if we remove that thigh cut, or was it a, hey man, we got to keep the piece count down?
Yeah, so off of memory, in Malgus's case, I want to say that we were doing it with aesthetic first and foremost, because like the padding along his thigh.
Okay.
Because like there was like a conversation too where like there was like, okay, how would we break this with like the thigh swivel? And it just became like the early test didn't look aesthetically pleasing. So we came up with like the solution for Malgus to just like kind of have a bigger hip cavity to try and get that range of motion that we would be losing with thigh swivel. So that's kind of like what we're able to do with like that. But this is actually part of like another question, but at least in the digital model that we're working on, it was a thing where digitally you get like a lot more range because there are things that you aren't aware of. So like, let's say like a pull test, if like this thing fails the pull test, you need to close the cavity so it hits that like let's say 4+ that quality threshold of sorts.
Okay.
So in like the digital, it's just like, okay, yeah, he's got pretty good thigh swivel, so we might not need to have this with the actual part cut there, and we also got the added benefit of the aesthetic. But then for two, it's just like when it actually goes into production, I mean, from the digital, it looks like it will kind of give us a more realistic limiter for how much your thigh does kind of go this way and that way. And we're also looking at our own thighs, seeing like what our own physical range of motions were. It's about 30 to 45 degrees like this way. So I'm like, okay, well, maybe like the conversation also came about like, since we wouldn't be getting like thighs full, there'd be like no like purpose for doing like a 180 with his like leg unless he's got like a broken leg. So let's just try and like finesse like the padding around like this area, and also trying to finesse the aesthetic to where it can be a really good looking figure, because all the stuff that we're seeing here in like the cinematics stuff too, he was like a more kind of like moving tank, so he wasn't really mobile in that way. So that was another kind of consideration that we had into the process with that too. But yeah, for Malgus, it's just like like I said, off of memory, we led with aesthetic, but it could also be the fact that he was a deluxe figure that we might want to like cut down on cost in that way too, especially with like a soft goods like a cape there
that
too.
He had, yeah.
So and then I think we also tooled up a new lightsaber blade, because like the one that we had originally was just too small and too kind of like dinky in that way. So we just kind of did that whole thing. So it was just head to toe. He was an entirely new figure. At the time too, gaming greats, at least off of memory, wasn't what it is today, where there was a lot of like things that we had to do with like gaming greats to get like certain like entries into the line. Whereas like Malgus, I think was, don't quote me on this because I don't really know, but I think that he was one of our first newly tooled figures in the gaming greats line, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he was one of the first, if not the first, labeled gaming greats figures that was not just GameStop. Yeah,
right, exactly. So there could have been like that whole side of it too, because when it comes to like costing and stuff like that, that's an entirely different department, like cost engineers and stuff like that too. So from sculpting, we just kind of lead with like what we've done in the past. It's kind of like our baseline of sorts. Okay. But then like when those conversations do happen with the broader team, it's just like, okay, we have to kind of adapt and kind of accommodate in that way too. So, and like I said, like I would say in the last like 2 to 3 years, the team has been pretty locked into what fans are saying like now. So even like with criticisms that we're seeing out there about the thighs and like lack of thigh swivel and stuff like that too, those are things that do like those are things that the teams are talking about in terms of like how they answer like that. Obviously I can't go into like details on like those resolutions, but it's a thing where they're always wanting to come to market with the most compelling thing that they can, because ultimately like it's the consumer that buys everything. So like if we're doing stuff that they don't really like and they just stop buying certain things here and there, it's like, okay, at some point we do have to kind of rethink our strategies for how we're going about doing things. So but yeah, all that to say that it's just kind of a thing where we just try and show up and do our best, in all honesty. Sometimes like compromises do happen, and we just try and make the best of them and just keep moving forward in that way. And then yeah, it's kind of like a push and pull in that way too. So
yeah. So I guess this was going to be my next question, but I guess I can build off of that. You mentioned soft goods, and I did want to ask you, separately about, your opinion on how the digital sculpting process works in comparison to the old traditional. You're using oftentimes clay or some other substance to actually make a mold for a figure. How does soft goods play into that digital sculpting? So I guess my first part of the question is digital sculpting more convenient, especially with you being, into game design and things like that? I'm assuming you have a preference toward that in general, but also when it comes to the soft goods, is that a note that you guys are given, like, hey, like we're going to do this figure and, for example, the cape is going to be soft goods, or is that something like you do a rough draft and then they tell you after the fact? Does that make it more difficult, like knowing that there's going to be a soft goods element to a figure?
Yeah, so, and sometimes like this does change too while we're sculpting like everything. Yeah. So sometimes we'll kind of have a pre-sculpted plastic cape or what have you, and then like at some point in time we'll be made aware that we can do soft goods here. But then also too, sometimes we do know that before we even start sculpting. So what you'll do is like want to try and factor in like that stuff, and even just do like a really quick placeholder digitally, just so you can kind of like sculpt around where that soft goods would go. Right. But it is very kind of a disjoint thing where we'll sculpt in like this whatever gap dimension that we define, that would be like the thickness of the soft goods, to try and accommodate that. But even still, just like sometimes when we get into like our like engineering like stages and like to see the actual physical model, sometimes the soft goods isn't sitting properly. So it's just like, okay, do we have to modify something in the sculpt? Is this a sewing pattern type of thing? Did the person sewing it just like kind of miss sew it type of thing? So that is kind of like a struggle with working digitally, where I love working digitally. Like it's definitely like, how you need to get things done. But the thing that
Right.
we lost going from, physical to digital is the immediate feedback for not only like soft goods, but also like seeing like the range of motion for certain things. Like I said before, the increased cavity for the thigh, and digitally it looked like it checked out. But then like when we went over to manufacturing, they're like, okay, we got to close this up a little bit so we can like meet these QA concerns in this pull test for the thighs. So again, those are things that, maybe even knowing that to go to the next figure would have made like a difference. But also too, just having like the immediate feedback of, okay, this will work, this won't work, would help a lot in the digital space. But it can't exist because you don't have things like physics and gravity that are working in digital. So it's and so when we have figures that come out like Sebulba, I mean, the fact that he stands as well as he does, that's something that's honestly incredible. The fact that he's such like a weird like form factor, but he stands so well, because again, you can't test that in digital. You just kind of have to go with like your gut and like also like what's worked in the past to try and make up, okay, we could see like this working for this reason. And that, like I said, goes back to my entire experience at Hasbro, where every single year you're kind of growing and just seeing like, okay, where you could have been better, but also like knowing how to be better for the next like project that you work on. And you can't really do like that unless you get like that kind of physical feedback to some degree. So and that's why our stages after the digital are so vital. The fact that you were able to test stuff physically first and foremost, and then we'll be able to adjust like that part of the sculpt and then send it back to manufacturing in that way too. So but yeah, so that's kind of like my more like roundabout for like that question. But all that to say that it is, even though like I've built up a good kind of library or checks and balances of trying to do things like this way that I know to work, sometimes you do get a project that just kind of challenges all of that.
Yeah.
And you have to reassess and then kind of even come up with new stuff that you hadn't tried before. And that's when I hop on a call with like one of the sculpt managers, be like, hey, here's where my mind's eye is at. Like, do you think this could be a thing that we could do? Type of thing. So it's like I said, it's always kind of like on a project to project basis that you're having to kind of reassess certain things here and there. So
Gotcha. So, and it's honestly such a great when you explain it, which by the way, you explained it very well, because now I'm like, I have a lot of understanding where before it was always kind of left up to interpretation. So like, for example, one figure that jumps out to me, generally, I think that over time, the consistency of the range of motion on those hip joints, on those modified hips, has gotten a lot better. And it just the design choice across the board, definitely I could tell was intentional. But I could tell that as the newer figures come in, that those hips move, they get me enough range when I'm trying to pose them around, because that's my biggest thing with when I get an action figure is, obviously with Star Wars, it's character selection in general, but my biggest thing is articulation at the end of the day. That's the thing that I enjoy the most when I'm posing my figure around. I think of a figure like the Farm Boy Luke that came out this past year, for example. That one, I was really left a little bit disappointed by the range of motion on that hip. And then when you explained that, no, that's just, the intention probably wasn't for it to be so limited, and then at the pull test or things like that, adjustments have to be made, and it's just the reality of, that design choice. So for me, that makes a lot more sense now, as to why that figure ended up having such limited range at that particular joint. Whereas other figures like the Ronin, for example, do not have that problem at all. Like that figure, in my opinion, that was my figure of the year for 2025. I absolutely loved everything about that guy.
Yeah, that's even though I didn't work on Ronin, I was like, I think off memory, like one like the first to put him forth in like figure selections, because I'm a big Visions fan. I love like that aesthetic. So I'm like, okay, if we're doing like celebration in Japan, I mean, like this Ronin figure would be awesome. Well, even before we knew like where celebration was going to be like at, I thought to myself like, we gotta get at least like one Visions character in like that, because there's so many different design aesthetics that are across the board with all that stuff. So it'd be really good to have a figure in a line that's just so different from live action and stuff like that too. So
yeah, man, it is little things like that though that I feel like that's important information to have as a consumer, because now I can be more educated when I go into, when I do a lot of action figure reviews. So now I understand another piece of the puzzle, another piece of the process when I go in and I'm having my conversations about the figure and I'm sharing my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just running through my questions here, making sure. I just kind of want to jump, since we're kind of talking about it with articulation, and then we'll jump into some specific figures that you worked on. If you want to share, like, your favorite parts of those processes and things like that. With articulation, again, with that being, like, for me, a huge thing with my action figure experience. That's something that I prefer over almost any other thing. How does articulation present a challenge to your process most, aside from, you had said earlier, you sculpt the figure without any articulation and then you build the points in? Is there an issue or a challenge that you've had consistently with a specific point of articulation? I know butterfly joints seem like those can really be a difficult puzzle.
Yeah, butterflies are kind of a little bit my Achilles heel, if I'm gonna be honest. Like, trying to get it to look good and then to function properly, it's like, okay, man, like, what's like, I still haven't found, because again, every single like form factor is different too. So maybe like this butterfly needs to be more exposed over here, type of thing. So it's just like, especially if you don't have, like, let's say a nice like PVC like overlay that kind of covers like that break. It's just like, if it's just exposed, you just kind of have to think about, okay, if like the muscle is going like this way, like that way, like what would like that look like? So butterflies are kind of a weird one for me. Everything else goes super smooth with, like, like ball joints and discs, but when it comes to like the butterfly, even though like at the end of the day it's still like a flat plane rotation, it's still kind of like it's hard to make it look good. At least, again, for me in particular, it's always I'm always having to at least save 5 to 6 different versions of a character that have butterflies to kind of pick the best one out of those 6. And it's a really weird thing to try and wrap your head around. But like I said, everything else when it comes to literally all parts of the other the character are totally fine. It's just like butterfly, but I'm just like, this feels odd. So it's still something, again, trying to better myself and just trying to, if I can find a good like common practice of like, oh, I need to increase this size of like this much at the get-go to make this part of like the process easier. I'm trying to make like little notes of like that for myself going forward. So those are, like I said, after every single project, I have a kind of a post-mortem of sorts of what could have gone better that I always try and like just learn from, and that's all I really can do. So yeah, I'd say butterflies are weird. So one bit of articulation that was super weird when I first did it, but then pretty much led to like this like kind of light bulb moment. I did a little bit of like the work on the droidica. So
dude, you're kidding.
Yeah, so I helped out with like that kind of little like track-based thing in the neck that allows us like, the neck to like slide out. So that's like a track-based movement, which again, that's actually another point of articulation that maybe a lot of people might not think about because they're more accustomed to the ball joints and the discs, and that's about it. But with track-based movement, I mean, there's a lot that you can do with like that you can't do with like with a ball joint or disc. So it's it leads to a whole new host of considerations of how we can get a figure to move. So yeah, that thing's sweet. Like,
so you're talking about this piece up here, right by the.
I'm talking about like the little like gray piece, like that. I guess what you would like
underneath.
Yeah, so like the little gray piece that would be, I guess, his neck that slides in and out of like that more kind of brownish copper, like. Yeah. So that like little gray piece that connects to the head, like I did kind of work on like the curvature of that just so it was able to slide back into the armor in that way. But yeah, and also too. So the first time I actually did like that articulation was on the very last Indiana Jones figure that we did for Indiana Jones: The Last Crusade, and like the
very cool.
And so Tom gave me like that whole project. He's like, hey, can you like he blocked out like this whole track in the hat, and then he's like, can you like clean like this up for me and like have it like work essentially? So I'm like, okay. And I was sat there for like 2 hours, not knowing like how is this supposed to like rotate around the head because there's no pin. So like, how do you, again, my brain at that point, only knowing ball joints and discs, I'm just like, how is this supposed to work? Because again, like this is digital. I can't really, have like that physical feedback of like if it works or if it doesn't. So I'm like, okay, how would I do this? So then I came up with a process for myself that made that hat able to slide forward, slide backward, even like twist on like that too. So, but that was like my first time doing track-based articulation. And like I said, that's like a functionality that you couldn't do with a disc or a ball joint, based off like the considerations that we had at that point in time too. So it's like, every single like time I'm met with like new articulation, or I'm also looking at like imports now too, in terms of like what they do. Like I have a Mayfix Ben Riley or Scarlet Spider-Man.
That's a good figure. Yeah.
It's an awesome figure. And
Yeah.
I was like trying to look at how they do butterflies too. So I'm just like, okay, they almost like add like another piece in like there from like what I see. Like they've got like a whole entire different kind of ball joint system that goes down into the torso and like allows like the butterfly to kind of go out like that way. And like this one, I'm just like, that's so strange to me. But like I don't want to tear it apart to actually see how it works, because it costs like a decent amount of money. Like I love the figure, so I'm like, I don't want to. But I wish like I had like one of those like MRIs that obviously those are expensive too. But to just see how it works for, instead of just like tearing it apart and having to try and put it back together. But yeah, so all that to say, right now as it currently stands, butterflies are still something that I try and figure them out as best I can, and I've got such a hard time with them that after I block out the figure, that's the first point of articulation that I'm trying to solve, because after like that, everything is cake. So
Wow. So I have, man, I keep coming up with more. I'm trying not to just keep going down this rabbit hole. So these two should be easy questions. Do you have a preference for building new articulation, or when you're here's a good one. So when you're given like, hey, this figure's going to be a lot of reuse. So here's the existing sculpt. Make this new piece that's going to go. Perfect example is like, most recently, they're reusing the Mace Windu for the new Plo Koon that's coming with that Commander Wolf. It's Mace Windu's body. They're just putting Plo Koon's head on it. Is that easier, or do you find that building your own points of articulation on a wholly newly tooled figure, where you can give them roly-poly wrists and you can give them the more modern articulation, is it more of a challenge trying to retrofit articulation, or is it easier because most of the parts are already made?
Yeah. So again, sound like a broken record, but it's like a case by case basis. Most of the time, like I would say though, it's easier to sculpt everything from scratch because you control every portion of that figure versus having to kind of fit around what's been done before. Because I have been like, there have been like some projects where we've got like a partial forearm that has to fit like this like new bicep type of thing. So like you have to kind of finesse like that to fit like the silhouette of like that forearm to get to like have like a decent or natural curvature to it. And then sometimes that doesn't work out. So at that point in time, then you can kind of make like the pitch like, hey, it's really not looking good. Can we maybe get a new part here if possible? So again, it's always a push and pull for a lot of things, but for the most part, I'd say just sculpting everything from scratch gives you full control to really nurture that function and that form. So I would say that would be the easier of the two. Obviously, you save time and money when you do a partial figure, but from a sculpting standpoint, just slowly sculpting, not really considering anything that Hasbro might be considering it in that way. Sculpting everything from scratch just gives me full like liberty to get the job done. So, and the other thing too that maybe not a lot of people consider is like, whenever we do a partial tool, chances are those were done by different sculptors, so they're going to have a whole different like kind of maybe design mantras that might be weird to mine. So I might have to match textures that they don't have access to. So I might have to try and like mimic like that, just so it, like, let's say if it's for a cloth texture on the upper arm, and they use like this one texture that I don't have in my library, I have to kind of recreate like that so it looks like it's the single part. So just those things too. I'm like, oh, if I were just sculpting all this from scratch, I just go through like my library and then just make it super uniform across the entire thing. But then you have to be a detective in that way too. We're just like, okay, how they made use of like this function in our sculpting software to do this done. Let me do like a few tests here and there to see if I'm slightly close. And then if I'm like really off the mark, I'm like, okay, I'll have to just like make a custom texture in Photoshop and then just import it and just hope for the best at that point, just kind of nurture it in that way too. So, but yeah, like I said, like there's some points in time that a partial tool does help a lot too, especially if I'm really slammed on work too. If I got like, let's say multiple projects, a partial tool can like help me out in the fact that I don't have to worry about this part of this figure. I can just sculpt like maybe like the one or two pieces for like this and work on like this other one too. So it's kind of like, there's pros and cons with both, but if just in a vacuum, like, and I had to make a game time decision, I only had to work on one figure, a newly tooled figure every day of the week. So
okay, yeah. And then I guess the last one, because I really want to get into some of your figures that you have worked on in the line. Is it For you personally, do you have more fun or an easier time working with non-human anatomy or with human anatomy? Because on one end, I could see it being a lot easier because human anatomy we're much more obviously familiar to, you know the
Mhm.
limitations, you know how things move. Or do you have a lot more fun working with those really weird figures like a Sebulba or a Droidica or something that even like a super battle droid, like, you know, while humanoid in
Mhm.
shape, still you have the shoulders that are way up here as opposed to like below a neck and things like that.
Mhm.
What do you have more fun with?
So honestly, and this could maybe be like me like just sitting on the fence, but I love both for different reasons. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
especially when it comes to human anatomy, because you have to make it look natural despite there being a part break there. So it's like,
Hmm.
okay, how am I gonna like break it at the elbow here and have it maybe fall in line with the curvature of the forearm muscle with like that disc break and stuff like that too. Um, and I find like that challenge to always be engaging in that way too. When you have something that's a little bit more robotic, okay, that lends itself a little bit more towards the mechanics of a figure in that way. So you're able to hide articulation a lot better because hey, it's a robot. It should have this part break because of this gear and that gear type of thing. But when it comes to a human, it's just like you have to suspend more disbelief because you know that that break doesn't exist on a real human. So just like okay,
Right.
so it's all about like how do you make that less intrusive to the visual, and even like how you like choose to do a neck articulation. Sometimes like you'll do like the break along like the jaw, and then you'll try and like if I were to make an action figure myself right now, I do the break along here and try and like hide like the base part of the neck in this like sweater of sorts. So when you've got like a natural break in like the reference that we get like this, that's awesome because that needs no justification. I can just do like that as I see it and just do like the part break that way and call it a day. But if you're working on any figure like that's got like let's say a bare like arm or whatever, it becomes a harder thing to have it look good, especially around like the elbow area. And that's another thing too, where like it's really hard to do double knees and double elbows in a way that looks good when it's bent. Obviously, when it's
Right.
like this, it's
Right.
like one thing, but once they're bent, part of like this is also based on how you pose it too. But very rarely do you get like the point in like an elbow with a double elbow.
Hmm.
I've seen like Mayfex, I think SHF do a fairly decent job on some of their figures. Like I actually have a SHF cooler, like Dragon Ball Z type
Hmm.
of guy, and he's got some really cool like ideas that again I never came across. But now that I'm to like this point in my toy sculpting career, I'm trying to get a little bit like a little bit of everything to kind of learn lessons from other companies too, apart from
Absolutely.
just Hasbro. So because again, like I'm trying to see what works there and what doesn't, what couldn't work for Hasbro. Because
Hmm.
for example, I mean, Cooler, he's got awesome like butterflies and like shoulder articulation in general, but that ball joint going off the shoulder into like the torso, the cavity is so shallow that I can literally do this and his entire arm just comes off.
Hmm.
So that would be a no-fly zone for like, let's say a Black Series figure because like that would be failing like, the pull test or the QA test. So even though like in a vacuum Cooler gets awesome range, like there is still like that kind of thing that you need to figure out with like with Black Series where
Yeah.
we can't do that. So obviously the range of motion might not be as extreme, but at the same point, if it does a shelf dive, it's not going to like, split apart in that way too. Where if Cooler did a shelf dive, that thing would be in pieces, and I would be heartbroken. So
Yeah.
needless to say, I've got him like at the very back of my shelf. So
I've had SHF figures fall like 2 feet onto my carpeted floor and they'll break. And I've
yep,
had wrists just snap right off the peg. Peg
yep.
is left in the arm. Whereas I have these 6 foot shelves behind me. I'll have like, for example, oh my god, I can't think of his name. Oh, I'm losing my. I'm such a fake Hu Yang. I'm such a fake Star Wars fan. He falls down all the time, and when he does, he'll fall 6 feet, and I've never had him break, crack,
Actually,
nothing.
I actually worked on that figure too. I worked on like
You
his like
did.
backpack arms. Yeah.
You
Hmm.
did. That's
And
too
also, I
cool.
actually did like edits on like the little edits on the torso, a good bit of edits in the actual like face there too. But here's a really cool figure to work on. Like that backpack was so cool to just see it, have it work in the way that we
Yeah.
wanted to. So yeah,
It's a fun piece. I like the how many joints the arms have on the back
yeah,
too. Yeah.
yep.
So speaking of figures that you worked on, I do want to talk about some of those. So obviously a big one, and I think this is going to be huge for a lot of people considering how big this set was in the community for 2025. You did do some work on the new Revenge of the Sith. Anakin and Obi-Wan,
Hmm.
particularly the ones for the San Diego Comic-Con set, as well as
Yep.
the single releases. So I think a lot of people would be really excited to hear about your work on that and
Yep.
how that process went.
Yeah, so first and foremost, this was the dream project for me to work on Star Wars Black Series. The Mustafar battle and the final exchange with like Anakin and Obi-Wan is my favorite moment of all Star Wars history. I was also,
Understandably.
yeah, I was also one of the people like every single year were like, hey, can we do like a Mustafar thing, scene or whatever? Like even though at that time it wasn't like we weren't doing the whole like vignettes that they're doing like now. We
Hmm.
are like, oh, can we like redo like our F3 Anakin, F3 like, Obi-Wan? Because it was like me and like at the time too, one of our engineers, he's a big F3 fan as well. So it's just a thing where like and all that to say too that the other members of the team too were beating the drum of like trying to do like F3 anything for any point in the line. But then obviously with the writer strike and everything else that came into fold, it gave us a little bit more like leeway to come to market with more kind of stuff that we just didn't have
Okay.
enough time to do in the past. So I think that the community has definitely seen like that too with all like our crazy character selections. Excuse me, the fact that we did like let's say a Shizor in the Black Series, Sebulba in the Black Series, that did have some weight in like what characters we could do given like the real world stuff that we were dealing with at the time.
Okay.
But Anakin and Obi-Wan for me, when we finally got the green light to do it, I said to Tom just like, hey, I know that we do like we have all like the vendors and everything like else like do like a main part like the sculpting because like there's no way that only two people can work on all the product that we do, but can I work on anything with this pretty much, or can I do like this, that, and the other? He's like, and he knew like, how big of a F3 fan I was. So when he approached me like the one day, to be like, hey, would you like to sculpt like the portraits for Anakin, like both heads? I'm like, yeah, that'd be great. Because the other thing too, like a little fun fact there as well, I sculpted like the portrait for the Ahsoka Anakin, and that
Oh
head
yeah.
was the base head that like I used for both heads of the Mustafar pack. So it's
Hmm.
the exact same head. I just changed like the expression here and there to give like that newness, and also too, the hair is different too. So I had to kind of break out like the hair piece from the head in a different way. But from a just a sculpt standpoint, just like the raw like base head that I had in my software sculpting program, it was really just like the same head because I had like the clean, this might be like a little bit more like a unfamiliar term, but topology. It's like that clean wireframe that allows me to kind of manipulate expression points a little bit easier
Hmm.
in a model. So just having that clean mesh to work from, so I can kind of like make like the expression the way I want it to. Really, like those like three heads all came from the exact same head, and then like the hair too. I remember talking to Zach and Mike at Fan Expo Chicago about like this too, but like the hair for I think for the Ahsoka Anakin and then for F3 Anakin, all like three like those hairstyles are different. And I want to say the Ahsoka Anakin hairstyle took me 3 hours, and then the F3 Anakin took me 5 hours because I laid every single
Wow.
strand by hand. It was the
Wow.
thing where like I got the main bulk. Excuse me, sorry.
You're good.
The main bulk of like the hair sculpted like that, just kind of like the chunk of it, and then like with like my own like custom like brush, I would just lay down every single strand, following like the overall flow that I established with the bigger volume of like the hair, and it came out really awesome in production. Because again, like that's another thing too that I don't think has been talked about, but like when we're looking at the sculpt, it looks super high fidelity, super crisp, super detailed. When you actually cut steel and like when you pour the plastic in like that, it softens it a lot.
Yeah.
So my concern, even though I put all this work into this hair, if that doesn't have a wash on it, there might be a chance that might go unseen in production. So I really had to push and emphasize the depth of like those hairs. And again, like if you push like the depth too much, all of a sudden you can't pull it from the mold, and then it's not manufacturable. So then you have to kind of compromise in that way too. So that took a good bit of time to get looking good, but also to have like end out the way that it did. I was ecstatic. Like, it was amazing. And then I also asked like Tom Tooman, just like, hey, are there any like edits that you want me to do on like the Obi-Wan head too? And I just did like small like little touches here too from like I think one of like our heads that we used was like the I want to say maybe like the Clone Commander Obi-Wan that we used as a starting point, and then we
Okay.
put on top like that. It was like I think the what was hailed as like the best Ewan McGregor like likeness at the time that we might have used as a jumping off point. But
Yeah.
again, I think like that might be the case. But what I got from Tom, like the head was pretty much like there. I just wanted to kind of maybe add a little bit more like of a point to like the beard, add some like kind of make the eyelids look a little bit more natural, because we actually did get some really good like Ewan McGregor like kind of eyes when we did like the Obi-Wan series. So I
Yeah.
wanted to make sure that we're carrying over all like those hallmarks to like the eyes here to make sure that everything was looking a little bit like better than what we did last time. And then just kind of refining like the line of the beard as well. So really just very subtle stuff on Obi-Wan, but for Anakin, it was like just right then and there. And like even like with the Anakin, we did get some really like rough scan data from like the F3 portrait, but it was a thing where like I think I remember like, asking Tom just like, why does he have like these like undulating like waves in like his like face? Because like apparently at the time like the technology, like at least like how they scan like Hayden's head was like one of like those kind of like a red line scanners more or less, where like if you like move it all,
yeah, it messes with it.
if you move it all, you can kind of like distort the visual. So even though like I did have a beginning scan, I mean all like the hair was like not really usable apart from just getting like the main idea of it. But even like then, what I was seeing in the reference pictures too, like the hair changed with every single scene, even slightly here and there, where like maybe like the hair's like more pushed out to like this side, or now he's got like a new curl going this way. So you almost have to pick the average of what you're seeing from like the scan, also from the reference. Right. So and even like then, like there's some things too that I question with me doing like the Anakin, where I'm like, okay, for like the scan, I did kind of taper his like chin a little bit more because like in like the reference he has like a smaller chin, but then like I still feel like I could like push a little bit more. So it's always like kind of like, okay, how much do I want to weigh the scan? How much do I want to take liberty with? What feels more? And that's the weirdest thing too. There have been some projects that I've been on where even with a modern scan data, it might not feel like the actor. And I know that that's a very abstract thing to say, but sometimes it lacks that essence. And again, it's such an abstract thing because, mathematically speaking, it's their face. They're now in like these like kind of 360 globes where every single perspective of their face is scanned. So it's their face, but there's like some portion of it that just it feels like maybe you're more accustomed to what this person having a baked-in smile, let's say. So if they're just doing scan data like this, it might not feel like that person. So just kind of like knowing how to inject that life into a scan. Again, completely abstract stuff. I don't have a formula for any like that stuff. I've just kind of all that to say that I did take like certain kind of like liberties in like that kind of Anakin scan that we had to try and make it more like what I was feeling in the reference, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And even like then too, like there's sometimes where I put maybe a little bit too much. I guess like trust might be like the right word in like a scan data, because scan data can also get askew too. Where I kind of sometimes weigh like that over the reference, and you almost want to be kind of working both at the same time. So again, like that's another kind of thing that I will check in my mind too, where okay, going forward, I might be a little bit more critical with the scan, making sure that it feels like the character, as opposed to just kind of cleaning like that portion up a little bit here and there. But for the most part, I mean, I still have to resculpt like all of Anakin's like face, especially when it comes to like the expression, because like his expression was just kind of that neutral kind of expression in that way too. But when doing like the Sith eyes and like the slight Sith like kind of tightening of the lips too, all like that had to be done. All the skin texture had to be done. I also had to like finesse like all like the different forms.
Wow.
The only thing that I did kind of only clean up from the scan was the nose was pristine. So like the nose, I just had to clean up a few like artifacts here and there. But like when it comes to like the lips and like the eyes especially, because like the eyelashes affected a lot of, I guess, like the scan of that as well. So I had to kind of cut all that away, resculpt it, and then like add back like the hair, add back like the eyebrows and all this other stuff too. And it came out pretty well. Like I'm really happy with how we were able to execute on like that figure. I think that how it was, I guess, rolled out on the live stream too was awesome.
Yeah.
Because the entire time, and it's so interesting that like I said, to work on this set was a dream of mine. I worked on a little bit of everything. Like I also worked on like a little bit like the droid that Anakin stands on or Obi-Wan stands on based off your preference.
That's cool.
I worked a little bit on like the top part of the main platform there too. Just like little touch-ups here and there. Like I ended up moving one like the pattern lines on the top platform. I moved it back because I saw that in the reference we weren't accurate to the reference in that way. So I just did a really quick scribe line and just adjusted that so it was accurate. And then I just tried. I also did a lot of I guess overhaul is not the right word because a lot of it was done, but I did work on like the lava as well.
That's cool.
I brought a little bit more gesture and then kind of a little bit more kind of force to all those lava effects. Like for example, the little lava blast going into the droid. Beforehand, it was a little bit more kind of flat like that. I gave it like a lot more curvature, like, just so
that
it
arc
gravity as it led into the droid. So little things like that I wanted to add to this set because again, even though it wasn't asked of me, what I would normally do is if something wasn't asked of me, I would put things on a layer, and you can do like this in ZBrush as well, where it's non-destructive in that way. Where and it's a really quick edit too, where it's going to take me maybe about 5 minutes to just get the idea across, and then I would do like that, save it on a layer, and then hop on a call with Tom, be like, hey, I know you didn't ask me of this, but like, how do you think about this? Like, do you think that this improves or this doesn't? And then like sometimes he'd be like, oh, let's kind of do a 50% blend between the two. Or sometimes he'd be like, oh, this looks awesome. Sometimes he'd also be like, he'd be honest with me. He'd be like, I think we kind of backpedal a little bit. And like, okay, that's fine because I can just turn that layer off and no harm, no foul type of thing. But on this set in particular, because it was such a dream project to me, I want to really see if I could contribute at least one thing to every little bit of this set. And also flashback too. That was an idea from Tom though. He had me do like the lightsaber clash effect, which I thought was an awesome idea. And we did it pretty well. It came out really well in production. And that was another thing too, where he explained to me like this like effect, and I didn't really get it at first because he had described it as like having like two C clips that would be nested in between a blast effect. So I literally just put like two C clips and then had more of a flat blast effect. So it's like a little bit more like a conventional C clip. But then like, when he told me like, no, we maybe like embed like the actual shape more into like the effect, it's like, okay, I have to build like the effect outwards like this, and then the C clip becomes a little bit thicker in that way too, more structurally sound. So again, that was like, as with everything, it's a team effort, but I look on that set and I just feel so much pride over it because of how much it means to me as a fan, but also the fact that we got it done. And then too, I remember it's totally funny that, timing is so funny sometimes, but on the Sunday night, so like the day before I got laid off, I was talking with Brandon, and we were just kind of we kind of geek out every now and then about Star Wars content and just like our excitement for what we want to do with the line and stuff that we want to see through. And I told him, I'm just like, you know what? I don't know how things will get better for me as far as a fan goes in the Black Series, because like this was like kind of like that pinnacle for me. Like that's obviously not to say that I'm not gonna like show up every single day and do my best work, but for me as a fan, like that kind of like overall fulfillment I would feel, I don't think it gets much better than like this. And then like the next day, I get like it almost kind of like played myself in that way too. But no, I think that was like the highest high too. To see the fan outpour of just like love for that set and to be a part of it, and just I don't know, it checked every single box that I ever had as a sculptor in the space, and just to kind of just see that and just to watch it live happen too, because I was just watching the live stream and just I had like like Discord stuff like pulled up too to see like the fan reaction like live in that way too, and it was incredible. I'll never forget like that time. So I was riding a high like that entire weekend, and I'm just like, this is great. But then, like I said before too, I got hit with the lowest low. So I mean, life's a roller coaster. But all that to say that I love what we did, and I love like the quality that we were able to get done with the set, and the fact that everything came out really well, even like right down to like the backdrop of the packaging. Like the packaging was amazing.
Oh yeah.
It was the fact that the actual 3D like lava effect blended so well into the packaging. I'm just like, across the board, just in pack, this thing is like a work of art. Like this thing is awesome. So I mean, yeah, I just have so much pride for that set. And like I said, in terms of like the type of Star Wars fan I am, it's not gonna get better than like that. It's just not, because that's my moment in Star Wars that's kind of like the I am your father moment for me. Like that's why I hold to such high regard, where I'm just like, to be a part of like that, I can't beat it. So
yeah, awesome, man. That's awesome. So on kind of the theme of highlights of your career there's also another figure that you were telling me was your first one that you really worked on. And that one was Darth Malgus, right? Was the first one that you had the whole
so majority like the whole thing. So even with Malgus, so with working like full time at Hasbro, you're kind of like the anchor a lot of times for like what comes in. So like the vendor like will like do like a main bulk of the sculpt, but then like you'll do like edits on top of it to make sure that it's like hitting a certain quality threshold, or you're just factoring in like licensor consideration to make sure that you get that approval first and foremost. So Darth Malgus, he's the character that I had like the most involvement head to toe on. Like I did like edits from head to toe. I pretty much just resculpted like the face. Also with that too, one of like the things, and one of the first things that I ever kind of put forth from a design perspective is I really wanted to try and get 2 heads for the price of 1. And what I mean by that is, like originally we had like the head and like the mask as like one piece, but those are going to be like additional like deco hits that will drive up costs. So I remember going to Tom and be like, hey, could we do this in a way where the mask is removable? And then to add to like that point, I know that in the first like cinematic, like Malgus, he's got kind of like the cocky grin and stuff like that too. So I said at the time, like, hey, if I can sculpt this like removable like mask in the way, so we can kind of have a smirk underneath like that mask, and so like when he's got like the mask on, it covers it. So like his kind of, you know, furrowed brow, he's more angry, he's more aggressive. But when like as soon as like that mask comes off, he's like kind of like more kind of like that arrogant type of thing. So you kind of get like two different temperatures to that expression by just kind of playing it at different regions of the face. So that was like one thing that, you know, I, again, because that wasn't like the thing going forward where, you know, we were going to be doing a removable mask. It's like, okay, if we can get this to look good, let's try and do it. And because when we split out from the head, we don't have to, you know, have all those deco hits on top of it. It can just be put in like the same mold as, let's say, the gauntlet or whatever. So that was like one of the things where I was really happy with like that suggestion, because at that point in time, I was truly learning how to optimize cost in a way that benefited Hasbro, but also benefited the consumer too. Because, you know, if it looks good, and the only kind of like, I guess, con with like that is I wish, and I was trying to do like this as I was sculpting it, but I wanted to do it where the mask could be put on over the head. You have to kind of pop the head off to put the mask on, because like I was kind of nervous to build out more material so you could clear like the head and have that look weird, to have like the tubing kind of billow that way if it was kind of pressed towards like the key point there. And then also finessing the skull in the way to where you could get like that, the skull would end up looking weird. So really at the end of the day, like if you want to have him without his mask, maybe just like bring the mask down and put it to the side, or pop up the head and apply to like some like hot water or what have you, and then pop it off that way. But still, like I was still happy that it did what we wanted it to do for the most part, save like that one functional thing. But I was just really worried about tearing as well. If I were to maintain that aesthetic, there's a good portion that after repeated use, you might get some tearing in that tubing. And to eliminate that, the only way to do like that is to thicken up this area. And then at that point, you're compromising the aesthetic. So again, it's the entire
balancing act.
Yeah. So, that's and then awesome. Like going, like I said, throughout the entire like figure too, I pretty much like did a lot of work on like the torso, the legs, the boots, added all like those kind of, you know, little pockets of like, you know, metal damage to like the pauldrons and everything like that too, just to kind of give it to that nth degree. Because one of the things that we always kind of aim for and Star Wars: The Black Series, I talked about this with Tom too, but our aim is to always try and have this thing be a miniature hot toy, in all honesty. And like that's what we always lead with. We always like aim for the sky. Honestly, like there are certain things that, you know, with costing stuff that we won't be, let's say, able to reach that. But if you set your goal high, okay, maybe if our aim is at, you know, Jupiter and we have to sell for the moon, okay, we'll have to sell for the moon, but at least we're not, you know, on Earth type of thing. So it's a thing where, you know, we always lead with that thought, where we always want to be coming to market with something that's gonna like be amazing, and that'll be like knocking your socks off type of thing. So going with that mantra, that's why I added that kind of, you know, additional detail to every part of like Malgus, even like the padding. I tried to do like some like really hard leather texture for like the padding on all of his body. For the parts that weren't padded on his actual like great part of his like legs and some of his arms, I ended up doing a different leather texture or different like, you know, fabric texture for like that too. So just kind of like that added like level of, you know, attention to detail to make it feel like a hot toy. That's what I aim for. I even did like kind of custom like scratches on the pauldron here and there. That is just again all done by hand. So it was a thing where I just really wanted to try and see how far I could push this, given like the time limits that we had. And let me tell you that the time limits are pretty extreme, especially when you're working like at Hasbro, because of the amount of volume of product that we put out. But just trying to do like come up with processes that are going to be getting us from like point A to point B a lot faster too, with regards to like that. You know, it's always a game of like how can I be faster, but also not sacrifice the quality for this, right? So but Malgus, he was like one that I just kept nurturing, and then like I said, every portion of that figure I did like edits on that really did kind of take it to the next level. But again, I wouldn't have been able to do like that without the vendor laying like that foundation like there too. So I just want to give credit where it's due like there as well. But again, as I said before, everything that we do is a team sport. Right now, with being an outside vendor, I can actually do everything from scratch now, which is awesome, because cool. I've got a lot more kind of, I guess, liberty to like our earlier point to make these decisions versus kind of, you know, cleaning up a portrait or making a new portrait and then adding detail or added finesse here, optimizing this articulation point here. I can just like from the jump just do a little bit of, you know, everything on that figure. So but yeah, as far as like, you know, what I worked on full time at Hasbro, Malgus to this day is still the one that I had the most involvement with. So
that's awesome, man. And I will say, I do all the figures you talk about that you had like involvement with, and when you talk about those little details, like when you sculpted like pitting on the metal or the scratches on the armor or the little details in the hair sculpts, those are things I've pointed out in my reviews, and I'm like, oh, that's a really cool detail. Like, I'm glad they like went that extra mile with the sculpt.
Right.
That is something that collectors especially are appreciative of, and that perfect artist's eye perspective to have on it, because I'll make graphics for my channel, and I'll when I do my reviews and stuff, I watch all my own stuff back, and that's that artist mentality of, well, I could improve this, I can always improve this needs to be the best that it can possibly be, and then I'm going to critique it, and then use those critiques to make it even better going forward. So that is like, I totally understand that perspective. That is something that is very appreciated, and your attention to detail on the sculpts is very noticed.
Well,
such as the next one I wanted to talk about here. You told me you worked on the head sculpt for this guy right here.
Yeah, so that was another instance where like I did like really substantial edits on the portrait to make it closer to like the likeness, because before like it was trying to get there, but then like I said, my specialty is like portraits. So if Tom like wanted to get something like really quickly done, he'd send it to me, and like within like maybe like a day, I could get it like done to a decent quality. But that was like the first thing that I worked on for Black Series full time, mind you, because I think that in one of our Instagram messages, technically my first Black Series item that I ever worked on when I was a temp was the little best car container that was with the client. So
with the client.
That was another instance where like I'm like, guys, do you have the right person for the job? Because they said the term living hinge. I'm like, does it breathe? Like what is this? Like, what? And again, with like that too, not to kind of like segue, but just to add on, like tack on to like this point. That's another example of like, a living hinge has to operate a certain way in the physical space, but like when you're sculpting it digitally, you almost have to like sculpt it in a mid range way, so it can either go fully open or fully closed.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, I'm a digital artist. I've got no beginning for my assumptions for like how this would be done. So I was looking at a bunch of different living hinges that existed on different products, seeing what their default state was, and when it was like tied in or clamped into where it needs to be clamped, how much bend you had in the little living hinge there too. So that was a whirlwind of a thing where I'm like, it looks good. Can it not function? But like I stuck it out, and it worked really well. I actually have never got my hands on it, but from like the reviews I've been seeing, I'm like, oh, that's how we intended it to work. That's awesome. So
the Camtono?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let me grab it real quick, because I know I have every single Mando figure that they've done so far. And I've got the client, which I guess and almost caused an avalanche there. I guess I'll beat the drum for those TVC people out there. Hashtag we need the client. We need the client. But yeah, I have my client. I bought him right when he came out. I think I was buying on Big Bad Toy Store by that point. But yeah, here he is, the Camtono right here.
Yeah.
My camera focus is super weird, but there it is right there.
Yeah.
And then the hinges, honestly, they work really nicely, because I know that there's like the little insert to grab it from the top, but I've honestly had better luck just like pinching it from the side.
Gotcha.
And then just opening it.
Yep. I also sculpted like little Beskar bars in there too.
Yep. Little stacks of. You sculpted the Beskar?
Yep, I did that too.
That's cool. Yep. Yeah. Those are these are done really nicely. I could see the little insignia, the little kind of like almost like Damascus. It's like
exactly. Yeah, I actually think that's one of like my beginning textures I used too, was just kind of like that kind of steel in that way to serve as like the Beskar type of texture. So
very cool.
Yeah, that was like the first thing I worked on Star Wars Black Series. I also did like all of that stuff from scratch, because when you're a temp or an intern, a lot of times you're doing stuff from scratch just again to try and reinforce that learning of the new process. But yeah, so that's kind of a fun thing that you've got like that, because like I said, I never held with that in hand, but I've been told that works really well from like
it does
the manager, like from what I saw online. So I'm like, okay, awesome, thank you, past Bailey, you did me a solid. So
it's cool, and they also reused it for the Werewookie for the Halloween figure.
Oh yeah.
And I have that figure in the closet, obviously, because it's no longer Halloween, but I have that one as well, and that one works just as well. So that is awesome. Super cool. But yeah, this Luthen Rail, man, the Skarsgård likeness is just ridiculous.
Yeah, I was really happy with like that too, because like some likenesses like do go really quick. Some others are really painstaking. They're really hard to get right. So Luthen off of memory went really well. I think the likeness that I had the struggled with the most, and it's not Star Wars related, was the Olivia Wilde likeness from Tron.
Oh, really?
And that, because like there are subtleties, because so likeness is weird in the fact that a certain image of this actor can look like an entirely different actor. Like for example, when I was like lining up all my like reference of like just Olivia like Wilde's face, there's like a 3/4 shot where she looked way more like Margot Robbie than herself. I'm like, how does this happen? Like what's going on here? So
Yeah.
But after a good bit of time just kind of finessing like that, you know, I was happy with like where we landed on that. And then the other thing with like that too is like it came back and she had like her team had no notes on the likeness. I'm like, okay, we did good type of thing. So, but that one was like, it's just like super difficult. But certain like portraits like, you know, go really fast. Hayden, I think he went decently fast because we had, even though the scan data was really just kind of askew and just not all that great, it still like served as a at least good like general direction of sorts. And then combine that with all like the reference I had like lined up too, trying to like pick and choose like my battles of where I want to edit from the scan to make it closer to the reference. Like I said, even though that sounds counterintuitive, where like, oh, the scan should be a 3D version of the reference, right? When you're working with like 2003, 2004 scan data, not really the case.
Nah, not as good as it is now, is it?
No. So that's kind of like one of the things where, you know, it's just it might be how I feel on the day too. You know, just like, you know, if I'm feeling kind of groggy or whatever, it's just like, okay, maybe this likeness might be a little bit harder, or maybe I might have much better reference with this actor to get this reference done, because reference does matter a whole lot. And I spend a good bit of time before I even start sculpting at all. I'll do like my reference hunt, because again, putting on the whole detective hat of everything, some people, like, you know, they wear for red carpet premieres, especially if they're like a very famous actor, they'll do like makeup, they'll have different lighting, different camera lenses that alters your perception of how that person actually looks. So there's a whole host of different things that you need to consider as you're sculpting stuff in the 3D space, because, you know, it's kind of like you have to create almost a cross section of sorts between this profile view, this front view, this 3/4 view, and just try and have it be a good combination of all that stuff. And sometimes it's a challenge, especially if you got like a new actor that's coming up into the scene where there's really no reference for like them. It's just like, okay, well, I've got two references. One's a front view, one's another front view. Just like there's side view is going to be like kind of like my own artistic license at this point, but I'll try and make do with what I got. So at some point, you really just have to make do with what you have as well, because I mean, you can't be delaying schedule because you didn't get adequate reference. It's just like if you didn't get it, you didn't get it.
Deadline's a deadline. So. Yeah. Now, there's two other figures I wanted to talk about, and these are, I'm assuming, both your portrait work as well. So two of the most impressive portraits, in my opinion. My favorite of the two, and honestly one of my favorites in the Black Series right now, is Mr. Yoda here from that recent Commander Gree Yoda pack for the Clones of the Republic line. Tell me a little bit about this one, because you did both of them, right? Both the expressions? Yeah,
both expressions. Yeah. So again, it's another example like me using the base head and just on a layer doing like the alternate expression. So when I got this Yoda head from Tom, it looked way more like the kind of prequel Yoda head. And let me back up. It looked more like the original trilogy Yoda head.
Gotcha.
So I need to, and maybe, you know, to a more like casual fan, it's like, oh, it's Yoda. It's just like there's a different design for both. So you got the original OT Yoda, and then you've got, you know, the prequel Yoda, which is the one I kind of, you know, grew up with and which I was exposed to. So that's another thing too, where, you know, Tom knew I was a prequel boy. He's like, you know, how do you feel about making edits to like this portrait on like Yoda? I'm like, I'm your man. So I made like adjustments to like the ears, the overall skull shape, the texture, like the face, like all the forms like there too. So that was another thing where like I did do a lot of work enough to like call it like my own in that way too, where obviously, like I said before, the vendor gets you like to a certain point, but then you kind of have to take it and just really see it through with like laser focused eyes in that way. And then the other thing, like I can't remember if we had talked about doing alt head, or if maybe that was a suggestion from somebody else at some point in the line, or but having the more kind of determined expression, I think that honestly, this is one example of, like, I want to say maybe us adding more stuff that wasn't planned beforehand. Again, don't call me on like this because this is like a far off memory, but like I want to say that we want to do a focus expression first, but then like when we found out that we could do the chair, if we did it a certain way with the costume, we can maybe do his more like subtle face there as well to make that make sense when you put him on the council chair in that way.
Right.
Again, don't quote me on like that, because like this kind of could be just me misremembering, but some stuff like that does happen, where if we can't add more value to a certain thing, if we do have those kind of bumpers, we will do that, because we want, again, you always want to lead with a compelling product first and foremost.
Absolutely.
If it becomes so compromised to the fact that it's better, it's best that we just don't do that. We will kind of maybe come back on that point if we do have the flexibility to do so with all of the other different partners that we talk with. But yeah, with the prequel like Yoda had, it was another thing where it's a dream as a prequel fan to just have like that be my contribution to the Black series. And they came out really well too. Like the inkjets for like those guys came out really well.
They did, man. They did.
I love it. And like also like shout out to all of the toy photographers out there that I'm seeing, because before working at Hasbro, I didn't know that there was people out there who did like this stuff. Obviously, like, you kind of like roughly know the fact that there's stop motion like animation type of stuff. So people do that, but I had no clue that you're like prominent people on Instagram doing like all like that stuff. But then some of the stuff I see, like even like taking pictures of any product, some of it looks photoreal. Like there was a I forget like the name of the photographer, but he took a picture of the F3 Anakin head, and he matched one of like the references I used, and he matched the lighting, and it looks so photoreal. I'm just like, that is awesome.
Yeah.
It's in like a kind of like a more subtle scene. Like it's just like a portrait picture of him with his like robe on, I think. And it's when he's like in one of the Jedi temples or what have you. But it's just like the way that it was shot, like the lens and everything was just like, this is immaculate. This is really, really great. And like, I mean, some of the photography that I saw come out for Malgus, for Yoda, for all of these other characters that I had a hand in working on, I'm just like, that looks awesome. This is so cool. So shout out to that portion of the community, because I mean, you all do amazing work. It just sometimes I'm just like, did they edit like this and maybe like overlay some of the live action footage? But no, they just set up their lighting. They might do some like really cool like special effects stuff like on top of it. But I mean, yeah, it's so impressive. So
it is really cool. They're really talented. Like a couple of my friends, like Fig Fury, he uses Malgus all the time.
I think I've seen some of his. Those are really cool.
Yeah, he does a good job. Then I have several other friends that are like action figure photographers, and it's a side of the hobby that I wish I was better at, because those guys do such an impressive job. And obviously Shooting Galaxy, who does a lot of the promo shots for Black Series.
Yeah,
extremely talented.
Yeah, I met him, and he's a really cool person.
Awesome.
But yeah, his setup is like, wow, this is impressive, man. So.
Yeah. One last figure I wanted to talk to you about was this guy who you told me you also worked on, came out recently, Mr. Darth Sidious himself. I have him in his pose, mocking one of his promo shots from Revenge of the Sith here. This is a challenging figure because of how scarred and grotesque he is, or did that actually make it easier because you don't have to play so much around with hair and all that other stuff?
So I'm glad you have this one on the list, because this is an example of me where the sculpts, like, I want to really push it. So so there's a little story with like that portrait. So much like with like the other like F3 stuff, like we did have somewhat of beginning scan data, but even like then it was hard to clean like that because it was like older scan data. There were like two examples of scan data coming back that were oddly really pristine and immaculate for coming out F3. Like that was like the Mace and the Palpatine that we put out. Like those scans were honestly near perfect. It was wild, the fact that they were like, the only thing I did for Mace was I took like our old like Mace Windu head and just projected the back of like the Samuel Jackson scan that we had, and just like merged like that together to make that consistent, because it seems like they only did like a scan from like the front. They did not capture like the back part of the skull, so that was kind of caved in. So that was the only part of it, apart from just like kind of surface cleanup that I did for Mace on that. And then for Sidious, the only thing that I had to clean up and kind of redo was the hair. The face was really well done. Like I just had to crisp up some lines that were kind of muddy and stuff like that too. So I mean, that's an example of like the scan doing a lot of like the work in that way. But then going back to like the Sidious, that was a thing where, and again going back to the whole like where the scan's a scan but it doesn't have the essence. I remember it kind of pretty much polishing like the scan, and it didn't, even for me as a fan, it didn't look right. And then I want to say that we had licensor comments that came back, and they said that they want maybe a more I guess maybe less elongated jaw, because again like that was like the scan, so I was just kind of using that as like the gospel in that way. And then when I actually looked at the references, kind of asked myself, okay, what kind of impression is this thing on me? I made edits that way. And then like I'll never forget, like Tom is like, he's an awesome collaborator, And this is an example of like that being the case where we were going to put like this. I want to say we were going to put like this guy on like another call, just kind of resubmit to licensor. And it was a thing where I want to say a day or two prior, I came back to it with fresh eyes, because that's the thing that does happen where you'll be working on something for so long at a period of time, and going back to the whole time investment of things where you'll be like less likely to make changes because you got so much in the project now. So when I was like we did have a little bit more time to where I could work on other projects on the side like that when I come back to it. So then I think maybe half a week passed, and then I came back to it. I looked at the portrait, and was like, oh man, this needs to change, that needs to change, like this line needs to change, this crease, what was I thinking, like why didn't I see like that type of thing, like this crease is all muddied and just doesn't look consistent with everything else. The expression wasn't looking all like that decent. So I told Tom, just like, hey, I this is another thing too, like I think I did something where I put it on a layer, and then I actually did like a little bit of an after hour sculpting on like this too, because again, there's a thing where this is F3 Sidious. He's one of my favorites. I want to really just hit it out of the park. So I put like this on a layer, and then I showed it to Tom, and he was like, okay, like this looks really, really cool. So he like, let's go ahead and do that. So again, like that, like we just had like, the one main, the main thing to do on like that portrait, but then to match the reference that the licensor had sent over, it needed to change from that scan to fit more of what we're seeing in that reference.
Right.
So that's another example, like, us just trying to be the best that we can, even though that we've got scans, sometimes that in some cases, is a hindrance. Other times it is like a massive pro in that way too. But yeah, Sidious, like that's another one where I'm really glad how it came out. I also sculpted like his like little hood and his like little like pendant on the hood too.
Yeah.
And I think I sculpted the neck too, if I'm not mistaken, because that was a unique. Yeah, that was a unique neck. So I did do like the collar, the neck, the head, and then the hood as well. And then, yeah, that was another example of like just like a partial tool that I just had to work on like this pretty much the portrait area, and that was about it. So I was really happy with how that one came out too. So again, hats off to the team and pulling it together with the inkjet, the application, like everything like that too, the soft goods as well. So it's awesome. So.
Well, man, you've done some impressive work for the Black Series line, and it is all the ones that we showed on screen today, like all the ones that you mentioned, like have all been favorites of mine over the last 5 or so years of just playing with figures, messing with figures, the presentation of them, and this is such a big part of what goes into the process. And it's been really great throughout this conversation to get not only your actual enthusiasm and like genuine passion for Star Wars through your work, but also understanding a lot better this part of the action figure making process. So I have a couple more questions before we wrap up our chat today.
Sure.
One being, you had mentioned Anakin and Obi-Wan, this was a dream project for you. Mm-hmm. Is there something else Star Wars, like let's say you got the choice to work on, you got given the silver platter, you get to work on anything, any scale, any era, no budget limitations. What is your dream Star Wars thing that you would love to sculpt and design?
Honestly, being the fact that Gendy brought me into like the fandom to the degree that I did, I would love if we ever did a dirge like that.
Oh my!
That would be. I would love to just kill it on that.
You are speaking my language, man. That is like, so. Would you do animated dirge, or would you do like the Dark Horse Comics like realistic take on dirge?
What I would do, and this is another kind of like point of like, I don't want to say controversy in like the fandom, but how we do realistic interpretations of animated content. I would want to do that for two reasons. One, because that's the dirge that I was first introduced to, and one of the reasons why I was a big fan of like Gendy Clone Wars. Mm-hmm. And then for two, from an artistic perspective, it gives me way more flexibility to make my own, kind of leave my own mark on that design, kind of like interpreting how that would look in real life. Yeah. Obviously, with like like other characters that are similar to dirge coming out, like, it's just like, okay, would there be different things that I would need to consider with like, oh, I need to sculpt like the Poltron this or that way. For me in particular though, I would just want to kind of like do my own thing with like some degree of like direction from what's been done in Star Wars before to maybe guide that realistic look. But for the most part, I mean, I would just chomp at the bit to just interpret every portion of like that character in a realistic style. Like, I think I'd have a ton of fun with that.
Yeah.
But yes, but again, going back to my appreciation for the community, I love seeing Dirge on how high he is up on all those lists. I'm just like, yes, please continue to beat the drum with me.
He's my number one most wanted Star Wars character for TVC, Black Series, Hot Toys, everything. I want Dirge, and just like you, man, it's so funny. I have both of his original action figures from 2003, the one with the swoop bike and the one with the jetpack. I have his animated figure from the animated line in 2003. He is just one of those characters that is just so captivating. Like just his look, and then that's a big reason why for me I've really become attached to Ravis from Jedi Survivor, because and Ravis is on my top 12, 25, whatever for every scale now too, because he for me was like that. When you have that boss fight, I get to feel like I'm Obi-Wan fighting Dirge on Mutalist.
Yep.
In that, and it's like one of the craziest, hardest boss fights in the game.
You're just missing the speeder, right?
Yeah, just missing the swoop bike, and I loved every second of it though. I think I had to take like almost 24 tries to beat that boss fight, and I was just laughing the whole time because I'm like, this is just me living out my childhood.
Yeah. When Ravis came back like into like the scene, I'm just like, okay, this is awesome, because like there is like love for the Gendai, which again, it's funny that a species Gendy, it's like, okay, they were subtle with that, but it's I love it. It's just like when I saw like that, I'm just like, oh man, could there be like Dirge DLC, even though the timelines don't check out? Could there be something here, please? Like,
yeah. I mean, hey, we see his slime, go away in the 03 Clone Wars, and he was in Dr. Aphra comics.
Oh,
recently.
He was, wasn't he? Yeah.
So who knows? Maybe he'll make an appearance. But I've been just that would be an amazing figure.
And specifically at Black Series, because again, like that's what I kind of got into this whole career with, is like Black Series. So I'd want to do the Black Series Dirge at 6-inch at that point, because there's so much you can do with like that, because he's got so many different like tools and like weapons that he uses just in like that one fight with Obi-Wan alone. He goes to like, I want to say maybe 6 different things. Like he is a armory. Like he's awesome. So I love to work on him. So
he's got the shield, the missiles, the little mace weapon,
I
flamethrower,
and the shields, like the little kind of like reddish pink like gauntlets that he uses.
Yeah,
I think he might have like rockets that come out, almost kind of like a similar
little darts.
Something like that.
Like Mando's whistling birds.
Yeah. So, but he would be. I'd love to work on that, because I mean, I would do so much like work on that, where you got me excited. Like I want to work on that stuff like right now, but I mean we'll see. Like I said, like the future is like kind of it's awesome in the fact that we're in like this moment in Black Series history where there have been so many things that we've done in the past, where I mean we could I shouldn't say pretty much do anything, because I mean ultimately I don't know, but there is a lot of like kind of good like ideas and overall good direction to really do more like these off the wall things.
Yes.
So but we'll see where the line is in the next couple of years. But I mean, for the past like I said, a couple of years that we've been more in the community, doing more like these kind of legacy character selects across the entire board, not only like in live action, but also like in the older video games and stuff like that too. Yeah. I mean, it's like, to be a collector in like the space, we see like a good bit of like everything coming into the fold, which I'm glad about. So I mean, like I said, even though I didn't really grow up with like the older like video games, like I think it's like Shadow Squadron and stuff like that too, or the Shizors. There's a fan base out there that really deeply cares about these characters. So just let's service them too. Let's also service like
absolutely.
Let's also service OT. Let's also service sequel trilogy as well. So I mean, even though that was a controversial trilogy, let's also service like that part of the collector base as well. So I mean, across the board, it seems like that there's a good sample size of everything. But all that to say that I'm always going to be beating any drum when it comes to the Gendy series, because again, it's another dream for me where I'd love to work on anything related to that part of the Star Wars mythos in that way, because I mean I just love it so much. So
it's just front to back. I can pick it up whenever I want, no matter what mood I'm in, throw it on the TV. We got, like I said, we could sit here and talk forever about Gendy Clone Wars. So I do usually a little lightning round. I do 3 little questions at the end of all my interviews here. I will do our lightning round, and then if there's anything you want to plug, you want to talk about, that you want to advertise, feel free. So my first question of these 3, easy questions. First one, obviously, what's your favorite Star Wars movie out of all the movies that have come out?
favorite Star Wars movie would still probably have to be Ep 3, even though Ep 1 keeps to climb up like through the rankings with like more rewatches. Like Ep 3, and again, like it's funny because when Ep 3 first came out, I didn't like it for the sole reason. And like this is very like kind of child brain of me in this way, but I didn't like Ep 3 because spoiler alert, people, but Anakin killed the younglings. So I'm like, when people were like, "Oh, this is like the best like prequel like movie," like it seemed like the crowd reception to everything. I'm like, do y'all just like not like kids? Like he killed like why are you like, oh, Darth Vader's here? Just like no, he did bad things. Like why? But after maturing and just rewatching and seeing what like the story was, Ep 3 is like, especially that final trade-off with Ewan and Hayden, or more appropriately Obi-Wan and Anakin, where he says, "You were my brother, Anakin. I loved you." That, even like the slight break in Obi-Wan's voice, has so much emotional resonance with me. And it just really encapsulates like that. These guys weren't just, Master and Padawan, or Master and Knight at that point, but they were brothers.
Yes,
they did grow up together. Because I mean, when Qui-Gon had his on his deathbed, pretty much saying like, "Hey, make sure that you train the boy up." Obi-Wan is still like a Padawan at that point. He's still kind of, he might be like a young adult at that point, but even still, that's a lot of responsibility, especially with Anakin being the chosen one. A lot of responsibility laid at his feet with that. So just having that kind of conclusion between those two characters and the way that it was done after, and still in my opinion, the best lightsaber battle of all time.
Ooh.
I mean, again, just my opinion. I know that we can argue context with different lightsaber battles. Maybe they weren't as choreographed, like as impressive, but they had more emotional or story relevance. Okay, whatever. But in terms of like this, all of it, the context in the story and the choreography, I love it. Even like the kind of like what a lot of people will say is this like the stupid kind of like fan twirling thing that they do to almost kind of like peacock each other in that way. I think that's awesome. That's kind of like that's a really cool thing for me. Like okay, maybe it could be done, but it's so cool that I don't care. So just let me have this type of thing. So it's just that type of thing. But yeah, so Ep 3 just for like that battle alone, and also Grievous, like I said before, my favorite Star Wars villain. Didn't really like his interpretation Ep 3 though, and also in like the 3D Clone Wars. I'm a big fan of like his Gendy version because again, he's like the Jedi, destroyer and killer in that way too. So it's I love like Grievous. I love seeing his battle with Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan's my favorite character too. So seeing like him kind of have his own solo thing that he could take ownership over, being the one who like killed like Grievous, like that's awesome. But yeah, just Ep 3 for me right now. Other things too have kind of climbed up over the years, like Rogue One is awesome.
That's a great one.
Yeah. But yeah, I'd say that right now, and also like the original trilogy too, it's good. It's pretty much to me, it's all good, save for a few things here and there. But with what made me and what left the most impact on me, again, was Ep 3, because I didn't watch the original trilogy until like probably I was maybe in middle school.
Yeah.
Like it was a good bit of time after I'd seen like Ep 3 to where I started to watch like the original trilogy. So and pretty much everything that I'd heard over the years spoiled the story in the original trilogy, like the fact that Darth Vader is Luke's father. It's just like, oh, okay. So when I got to that part of like the movie, I'm just like, okay. So it just again, seeing it at a younger age too, I didn't probably appreciate it as much now as I do when I rewatch the stuff, because again, I've grown. I've kind of I'd like to think I've matured a little bit, right? So you kind of
we hope so.
Yeah, we hope so. So there were some like nuances to like the acting and that delivery, and just the overall story of being told that you really lock into. But yeah, for me, it's got to be Ep 3. So
yeah, totally. And then I think I know your answer for this next one, but what is your favorite Star Wars show or series?
Ooh, yeah, it's got to be Gendy. I mean,
gotta have it.
Gotta be Gendy. I mean, yes, there are like Andor is amazing. It's awesome.
It is.
But again, speaking as far as what's contributed most to my fandom, the Gendy series is what made me a fan of Star Wars. So above all else, you could have the best thing to come out of all time, and for me, it'd still be the Gendy series because of what it means to me as a fan.
Yeah.
Because again, like Andor, it's the writing is, in my opinion, I know that that's another kind of hot take, is the writing to me it's awesome. Like I think it's incredible. I know that some people say it's boring. I think it's awesome.
It's impeccable.
I think it's like just even how it's shot is expertly done. Like there's a care and craftsmanship to like the cinematography that I'm just like, this feels awesome. And also it makes the Empire feel super serious, whereas like sometimes they can be seen as like more comedic relief, which I don't really
Cannon
like
fodder. Yeah.
Yeah, and to me, like that's kind of like a tonal clash. Like you're telling me like this empire has a lot of impression and like power and like, the area, and then you play them for last later on. I'm just like I get like comedic relief to kind of soften something that's really dark, but to do it at the amount that we've been seeing it, I'm not a big fan like that. Like so, but all that to say that Genji for me, it's really cool. They're using the Force like in ways that you see like a superhero use the Force. The fact that Mace Windu is punching a super battle droid with the Force,
speed bagging.
That is, I'm sorry, like that's like the coolest thing. Like that's just it's won it for me. So
awesome show, man. We could. I think we're gonna end up talking about Clone Wars. We should do a whole thing where we just deep dive 03 Clone Wars.
That'd be cool.
But and then the last one, obviously, who is your favorite Star Wars character?
Obi-Wan. It's gotta be Obi-Wan.
It's my favorite Jedi.
Yeah, Obi-Wan. Yeah. I mean, pretty much like when I was watching like the prequels trilogies for the first time, even though I didn't really like the movies, I liked little bits and pieces of the movies. Obi-Wan consistently was my favorite character throughout all of them. As I've gotten older, I've learned to I've actually liked Qui-Gon a lot more because of, again, his nuance for like his methodology of how he views the Jedi in that way, and also his like kind of relationship with like Count Dooku. I find like Count Dooku to be an interesting person there too. But yeah, for Obi-Wan for me, he's a character that if you really look at what his character is throughout all the prequels, and then also leading to the original trilogy, he's the character that's probably suffered some like the greatest loss that we've ever seen. Obviously, like Anakin like lost a lot, but when you look at Obi-Wan, going back to his master, who he looked up to, trusted him with the chosen one, Anakin. That's his dying wish. You have to honor it. I mean, and you are given that responsibility. So, and Obi-Wan, if you read some like the novels and the comic books, and even look at some like the video games, he is a Jedi's Jedi. He is like that person who is so steeped in like that belief system where he is just like he's a Jedi through and through. He's way more adhering to the Jedi principles than Qui-Gon ever was. Qui-Gon was way more skeptical. Obi-Wan is way more kind of like set in like that belief, which again kind of does work to that detriment there too. But with him, can you imagine having this responsibility placed at your feet, and then that person essentially wiping out the entirety of the Jedi and being partly responsible for that? What that does to your psyche, what that does to your like overall morale and like your worth as like a Jedi that has no Jedi order to be a part of, like that to me is insane. And I wish I won't go down this rabbit hole because this would be a rabbit hole. I wish they dove way more into that in the Kenobi show.
I agree with you.
Like if you keep it on Tatooine, keep it like an internal like psychological kind of like thing that he needs to go through, whether that's like a Jedi trials where he has to do like let's say like Force Ghost training with like Qui-Gon or whatever. Let me see like that. I don't need like this like grand adventure out Tatooine because I'm like you can't leave Luke Skywalker. You can't. And the fact that Luke, like Obi-Wan at the end of like that series, he starts to see it kind of like he doesn't want to repeat Anakin in that way. So he realizes that he has to do things differently with Luke, which again, I thought that part of like the show was awesome. That's what I want to see. I want to see Obi-Wan go to like the lowest low and then come back to like, okay, I can't run away from like this. I have to meet it, but I have to go about it differently in order to see a different outcome. So that to me is like why Obi-Wan, he's like the person that I find myself rooting for because of how much he has lost. Because like Anakin, he did lose a lot too, but he was like the main motivator for doing all those actions. So I guess with Obi-Wan, it's like a little bit more like, okay, I feel very bad for him because you can kind of see that he wasn't the proper teacher for Anakin either. Like Qui-Gon would have been that teacher for Anakin to, even if Anakin had a slight skepticism of anything with the Jedi, he's not going to Obi-Wan with that. He would go to Qui-Gon with that too, because Qui-Gon's already kind of like skeptic in that way. So there is that kind of like divide between wanting to be, really set in your beliefs, but also not being, kind of flexible enough to hear somebody's like side of like this, that, and the other. So, but yeah, for me, it's gotta be Obi-Wan because of just how, again, like Ewan McGregor and like Alec Guinness too, they both do a phenomenal job with the acting, and even like with like the anime shows too, across the board. Obi-Wan just, I don't know, he's somebody that he's
one of the best of all time, man. Yeah.
So
yeah, that's a great choice. Yeah, like I said, my favorite Jedi, one of my favorite all-time characters. I was always an Obi-Wan over Anakin kid. Always. Yep. I would always think the kids that like Anakin were weird. I was like, nah, it's Obi-Wan all day, guys. Let's get up. But yeah, well, on that note, before we wrap things up here, did you want to plug anything that you're working on, anything that you're, want people to keep an eye out for?
Yeah, so I'm working on like a few like small things here and there, like personal projects. Like one of which is like a Sega Genesis game because I've fallen into like love with retro gaming. I got my first Super Nintendo 2 years ago, and I've
Nice.
also got Sega Genesis. I got like a beginning library of just retro consoles. I got the Atari 2600, like the Super Nintendo, and the Genesis all like stacked up on like
Yeah.
my shelves right now. I just recently got a Neo Geo, which again was a little bit pricier, but I got it because I wanted to play games on that platform. So I'm developing a game for the Sega Genesis because there's a game engine out there that supports that. So even though I'm not really, let's say, the most savviest of programmers, I know enough to make use of the game engine to build for that platform. So I'm currently working on that stuff. I'll be coming out with like announcements for that project probably over the course of this year, probably later on in the year, which mostly I just keep it to Instagram these days. I'm not really active on Twitter, X. I think I just opened up a Blue Sky account. I'm kind of a social media ghost a lot of times. Like I can just lock into what I'm doing. So, but if you ever want to see like anything that I'm working on, definitely go to Instagram. I think my handle is Bailey Wheatland Art, but let me just look that up really quick just so. And obviously, it'll probably be in the description here as well. But
It'll be in the description. I'm going to pull it up here as well.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so my Instagram handle is actually just Bailey_Wheatland. So you can see some of my work there too. I also got my website link there as well. I haven't been able to update it because obviously stuff that I work on at Hasbro is like NDA. So most of my professional stuff, I haven't been able to show. All that to say that I'll be working on personal projects that will be outside the toy space. They'll be more geared towards video game development. But still, I'm going to do some really cool stuff. And then on that point too, if I have time, I'd love to do my own version of Jack and Daxter, like just like character art for like that, just kind of reimagining of what they would look like in today's stylistic design aesthetics, and then maybe do like a really cool Sonic the Hedgehog like redesign in that way too. So I've got like other things I want to do with everything. So, but all that to say that I'll be working, and then I'll be trying to be better at posting things because I know that some people are curious what I'm working on. So. But then I've also got like a small like little thing that I'm working on behind the scenes that I won't really like announce like right now because I'm still heavy into the R&D process of it, and there's a lot of like wishful thinking that it's going to work or not. But if it does work, I'll be more vocal with like that, and you can look for like that announcement probably later on like this year too once I do the proper R&D behind it. But yeah, all that to say, I'm going to be keeping pretty busy this year. So
Awesome. And from what we've talked about, I'm looking forward to some of these projects. It's going to be pretty cool.
Definitely. Yeah. I'm excited to see like, what I can do now since I haven't been like in doing my personal work in a long time, kind of come back to my own personal design thinking with my own content and seeing where that takes me. So I'd be glad to, share that with anybody. So.
Awesome, man. Yeah. Well, Bailey, thank you so much for taking the time to, chat with me today. Hopefully everybody that watched enjoyed this this little interview here, this conversation we got to have about action figures and about the production and process of, the action figure world, and about what goes into both creatively and logistically the process of making our favorite action figures. So, Bailey, again, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been an awesome chat here. Guys, again, check him out on Instagram. It's linked in the description below. We showed it on the screen here. On top of that as well, you can check out all my links in the description below. So guys, with that, I hope you all enjoyed this interview. We'll catch you for the next one, and may the Force be with you.
Breaking off. All units, fire at will. 1-2, pick your targets. Too many, Captain. Watch your stabilizer, Gold 6. Anybody cover me. I got 2 vultures on my tail. Gotta hold them here. Watch your left. I can't shake them. I'm hit. Where's our reinforcements?